talked to Ellen and to Yolanda in advance. So I know they've got rich information for all of us. So if you want to, you can listen first and then ask questions at the end, but feel free if it's burning. And I'm supposed to be looking this way. So if anybody thinks I've got the back and you want to move over here, go ahead, because I can't see. In progress. You don't have to be quiet. I do. Thank you, Bert. Good morning, everyone. It's exactly 9 o'clock. My name is Maria Meyer. I have the incredible honor and life force giving pleasure to be one of the leaders of your Women's Fund, Miami-Dade. We have an amazing board of directors, some of them who are here with us physically, some who are online, and incredible staff. I'm so, I don't know, I don't love the word proud, but I'm so proud of you all. And we're all here together with amazing volunteers, amazing community members, and so many leaders who have signed up for today's advocacy training. I learn so much every year, and I invite you to do the same, to be hungry this morning, to be hungry, and generous. We ask you to share also everything that you learned today with your extended networks, and know that this is being recorded right now. So within 24 hours, this recording will be live on not only on our website, womensfundmiami.org, and also on our YouTube site. We ask you to use it, leverage it, pretend it's your own. I don't care. Slice it, dice it. If you have some quotable quote from Yolanda Cash Jackson that you want to share with your PTA, do it. If Alan Mattison gives you a nugget that you need your board of directors to understand about the difference between lobbying and advocacy, please use it. Whether it's in its integrity or a piece, this is your Women's Fund, this is your advocacy training, your impact collaborative, and we thank you for being fully present. We couldn't do this without the fuel that we have from so many of our incredible folks who invest in us, Carrie Mead Foundation and Kaufman Rawson and what's that? Sure. Yes, good. And so all the incredible folks, just like many of you, who support this organization. So we thank you very, very much for this and all you do. I didn't mention, I was about to mention Citrus Health. So thank goodness there are Mandarins back there reminded me to thank Citrus Health for being our health and well-being pillar sponsor. You know that we have 4 pillars and we have 4 organizing principles. So really we consider that freedom from violence, so stop sex trafficking campaign, etc., domestic violence awareness is core, because if you're not free from violence, it's very difficult to do anything else. Economic mobility, full stop. Health and well-being, and leadership. So we consider today's training a leadership pillar training, but they all work together. We also have 4 programs. One is these amazing convenings, and we thank Daniela Una for putting this all together here. We do public awareness campaigns, like some of the ones you're here. You see these public awareness campaigns, and we might have one on the screen as well. And that's very, very important that people get the same messaging together. We do some incredible systemic grant making and working with granting partners in the early learning world and child advancement, and we also are working on an alliance for infant maternal health. So we do some very complex work with granting partners and many community members, many of you leaders who are on this webinar with us today in the audience. And then we have something incredible, which is our fourth program, which really has tied things together with gravitas and importance, and that is our data and research. And to that point, I'm going to ask Viviana Alvaro Pacheco. It doesn't matter.
A bit of a collaboration.
What's that?
Okay.
I can't look both ways.
Mention
Viviana Alvaro Pacheco is going to say what she wants me to say and what she was going to say.
Yes, I will do that. I will do that for the both of us. Thank you so much, Danny. We just also want to thank our event collaborators, Junior League, Miami, YWCA South Florida, and the Miami Women's Club. Yeah, can't go on without mentioning them, you know? Thanks, Danny. Can we go to the next slide, please? Okay, we want to hear from you. We will be conducting 3 polls for our live people. Those will be QR codes. So you'll be able to scan your QR code, do the poll, and then you're done, right? For the people online, you will have the poll pop up on Zoom. Is that right? Okay, I'm saying correct things. All right, awesome. Poll 1. For our people live, please grab your phone, scan the QR code, fill out the poll. And for our people on Zoom, please do the poll. Awesome. We'll give you a minute to scan. All right. Looks like everybody got it. Yes. All right. Moving on. So this is my part. We got there. Good morning, everybody. My name is Yolanda Pacheco. I am the Director of Research and Policy here at the Women's Fund. And today I'm going to be presenting or giving you all a sneak peek into our 2025 policy agenda. This is our state and local policy agenda for 2025. It will be up online in the coming weeks, so you really are getting a sneak peek. We have a one-pager here where you can see what we're all about. And basically we have 3 issue areas that we are focusing on for this year. They include supporting early education initiatives and women's economic empowerment by investing in early childhood education. We do this especially at the local level. We are encouraging businesses to offer on-site or subsidized childcare, and we're also asking for supportive paid parental leave. Our second issue is improving maternal and infant health outcomes in our community by providing access to quality reproductive health care and peri and postnatal care for all. A glimpse into what that looks like locally is to expand the reach and work of the Miami-Dade Alliance for Infant and Maternal Health, which is an initiative that we started this year and which you will all learn more about in the coming months. We also provide targeted education and resources on the effects of extreme heat on pregnancy health. We're actually going to be hearing a little bit more about what that looks like with one of our speakers. And the last but not least, there's so many issues, to support the standardizing of data collection on gender-based violence victims by police departments and making it publicly accessible to enhance data extraction, efficiency, and transparency. What we're really looking for, especially at the local level, is to advocate for the standardized collection and public sharing of data on gender-based violence through local police departments, which entails like using the same definition for domestic violence and sexual offenses, also making this information publicly accessible. And then hopefully in the months, years, maybe to come, to develop a county-specific plan to address gender-based violence. And that's my little snippet. And now I have the pleasure of passing it on to Alan Mattison, our first speaker. Thank you, Alan.
Thank you so much. Let me just share my screen and it actually worked. That's awesome. Thank you all for having me today, and thanks all for coming out to the Women's Fund's Advocacy Day. What we're going to talk about first is talking about how to keep nonprofits safe in both the current environment that we're all facing right now with the Trump administration and state government, and then talking also about that line between what's lobbying and what's not lobbying, because a lot of organizations don't really know where that line is. And if you don't know where the line is between what's lobbying and what's not lobbying, groups tend to hang way back. And the goal today is not to hang way back. The goal today is really to understand where are those lines so we can get our toes right up to the line. And then we'll talk a little bit about some strategy. How do we plan strategically? How do we maximize all the different pots of money that our organizations have available to us so that we can be the most effective advocates in our communities that we can possibly be? As we go along, if there are questions, I've got the chat box open. Feel free to ask questions in the chat box, or if you're in the room, just raise your hand. I want to make sure that, if there's something that I say, I'm sure if you're confused by what I said, there's probably a dozen other people who are also confused by it, and they would all appreciate stopping me and asking me to clear up the confusion. So please don't be shy, and feel free to ask those questions as they come up. The big picture context, as everyone's aware, the Trump administration started off with President Trump issuing a flurry of executive actions, a lot of them targeted at or impacting nonprofit organizations. Some of them were based on ideology. Well, a lot of them, frankly, were based on ideology. Some of them ended, they aimed at what he called illegal DEI. It's not clear whether the view there is that all diversity, equity, and inclusion programs are illegal, or whether the idea was to go after the illegal programs. Totally unclear and vague. But he was going after a whole series of different activities. A lot of it impacted nonprofits, probably a lot in the room, who receive federal grants or federal contracts. And it really shut down a lot of the community-based programs that nonprofits are able to engage in and to provide. It also provided a whole lot of additional pressures on community organizations as these funds dried up to serve communities. Other nonprofits and state and local government have to step into that breach. For example, feeding hungry families and things like that. So we're seeing it across the board in those actions. There've been a whole bunch of other destabilizing actions. Some of them have been attacks on law firms that you've seen. The law firms that fought back have won. And that there were also law firms like Paul Weiss and Skadden Arps that you've heard about in the news. They capitulated. They gave in to President Trump, and they suffered both lost business and they suffered reputational harm. There are attempts going on right now, as you've seen, to control universities. Columbia University initially submitted to President Trump's efforts, and then Trump has kept going after Columbia over and over again, whereas Harvard has fought back and has won, at least temporarily for now, in this battle. And then nonprofit organizations like environmental groups on Earth Day. There were rumors that the president's administration was going to go after those environmental organizations. And, there's been a organized effort to push back against the efforts to target environmental and other nonprofit organizations. So we're seeing this tension between the attacks on different aspects of civil society, while at the same time, groups are pushing back against those, and the courts are pushing back also. The courts are ruling against the Trump administration on a lot of these actions, saying, look, we have a rule of law, and you have to, the president has the right to implement his policy priorities, but he has to do it through the right channels, through the way the government is set up, structured, and using, in conjunction with Congress and through the rule of law, as opposed to trying to do. Thing that we've seen is, for example, the Supreme Court, in a case called Students for Fair Admission, struck down consideration of race in college admissions. That was a case that involved the University of North Carolina and Harvard University. There was a case also that involved grant making to businesses that were owned by Black women. That case, the organization that was making those grants was sued. The case was settled. The big picture here, though, is that there are these cases that are going on, and the standards tend to be pretty vague. It complicates organizations' efforts to try to be in compliance in this realm of identity-based grant making and identity-based benefits. And to a large degree, that chaos and confusion is the point, right? The Trump administration's orders, many of them have been indefensible and clearly unconstitutional. These court cases have come up with vague standards. What it's doing is it's giving everybody a feeling of destabilization, right? A lot of philanthropies, foundations are pulling back when they don't necessarily have to, but because of the destabilization in this realm, a lot of foundations don't know what to do, and they're just kind of getting frozen because they don't want to be the next target, right? And it makes running a nonprofit, makes nonprofit advocacy a little bit more challenging because people don't know where they stand with some of these things. And so I just wanted to start by acknowledging that. And because we're working within that context as we do any of the work that we're doing, whether it's on, protecting pregnant women from extreme heat, whether it's feeding local communities, whether it's bolstering education or making sure people have access to healthcare. All of those needs are more important than ever, but it can feel really confusing as you're trying to do that work. So I just wanted to start off by acknowledging that. What I will do, because it's, there's a lot to this, I'm going to circulate a memo that the folks from the Women's Fund will give out to all of you. I'll send around a memo that talks about steps that nonprofit organizations can take in this time to make sure that they are as strong as possible in terms of being able to defend themselves if there's an investigation or something like that. That memo will help to talk about things that your board of directors can do, things that the senior leadership of the organization can do to make sure that you are as prepared as possible if there's an IRS audit for your organization, for example. So the other thing we wanted to talk about today is lobbying, right? Because one of the big issues that all of our organizations want to do is organizations, especially 501c3 organizations, want to try to influence public policy. They want to advocate for positions that will help their communities. But they know there's a limit to what they can do, and there's, a lot of confusion, and people are a little bit uncertain. And so what happens is people stay way back. They try to hang back, and they're afraid of getting involved with lobbying. So one of the things we wanted to talk about today and really focus on and answer the questions that people have is, what can we do as a 501c3 nonprofit to help pass legislation, to win ballot measures, to encourage agencies to adopt rules and regulations that will help our communities? So the very basic thing here is to dispel the myth about 501c3 organizations and lobbying. The bottom line is that 501c3 organizations that are public charities are allowed to conduct lobbying. Now, there's a limit on how much those public charities can spend on lobbying. There are a couple of different ways to measure that, and we will get into, I'll send an email that'll get into the nitty-gritty on the details of how to measure that lobbying. But the bottom line is that public charity 501c3s are allowed to conduct lobbying. Now, everyone's probably asking, well, what do you mean by a public charity? So there's two types of 501c3 nonprofits. There's public charities and private foundations. Public charities you can think of as any organization that does fundraising, whether you're raising money from the public or whether you're getting grant money from foundations, or taking money from government agencies. If you're getting money from a variety of different sources, you're a public charity, and that means you're allowed to conduct some lobbying. The other type of C3 is a private foundation, and those are entities that are funded just by one family or one company, or maybe, like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is funded by Bill and Melinda Gates, and also his buddy Warren Buffett throwing money into it. But the Gates Foundation is a private foundation because it's just receiving money from a limited number of sources. The Gateses and the Buffetts, they're not going out and doing any fundraising. Now, those private foundations, because they're just raising money from a limited number of sources, the IRS says you're not allowed to directly pay for lobbying. And what that means is the impact for the people in the room is that a lot of private foundations are going to limit their grants and say you can't use our grant for lobbying activity. Now, the one thing I do want to mention is private foundations, when they give grants to public charities that are for general operating support, meaning anyone, you can use their money for anything at all, it's not restricted for a particular program, that money can be spent on lobbying. Let me reemphasize that. So if you're a private foundation and you're giving out grants, when you give out grants for general operating support, the recipient organization can spend that money on lobbying. And if you're a public charity, you're a C3 that does a lot of fundraising. If you're getting general operating support from a foundation, read the grant agreement really carefully, because it's likely that that grant agreement will say none of these funds are earmarked for lobbying, which means you're allowed to use the money for lobbying. Kamali asks the question, are community foundations public charities or are they private foundations? Great question. Thank you for asking that. Even though a community foundation has the word foundation in its name, it's a public charity. A community foundation is getting money from all sorts of different sources around the community. So because it has so many different sources of funding at a community foundation, it's a public charity, even though the word foundation is in its name. So I'm glad you asked that question, Kamali. So what it means is that community foundations are allowed to engage in lobbying. One context piece here is that what I'm going to talk about today is just the IRS rules for lobbying. Now, Florida and some of the jurisdictions within the state have their own separate definitions of lobbying, of when you have to register as a lobbyist, when you have to report your activities as a lobbyist. Those are different sets of definitions. So there are things under these IRS rules that you might be scratching your head and say, hey, I don't know what this means. Like, that's not lobbying in Florida. You have to pay attention to both sets of rules. There are things that are going to be lobbying under the Florida rules that just aren't lobbying under the IRS rules. And that means that even though we might have to register and report in Florida as a lobbyist, we can use a non-lobbying grant from a foundation to pay for that activity. And it seems kind of weird. There's a little bit of cognitive dissonance in that, to be like telling the IRS and telling your foundation grantor, hey, we didn't spend any of your money on lobbying. And then turning around and telling the Department of State, yeah, here's the lobbying we did on this Department of Health regulation. And you just have to understand that that's okay, because these federal definitions through the IRS that are imposed on nonprofits are separate from the state definitions in Florida. And I want to acknowledge not everyone in the room Not everyone in the room is going to be comfortable doing lobbying. Your organization might be coming from a place where the board of directors feels it's not within the organization's mission to do lobbying. And that's fine. And we have to, within our coalitions, recognize that and respect it and respect where people are coming from and recognize that policy doesn't change because of any one organization or any one person. Policy changes because of the whole coalition. And I think of it as like a policy change ecosystem. You know, you've got researchers, you've got government agencies, direct service providers, congregations, local organizations. All of them have an important role to play. So, you know, if your organization has researchers, your researchers should talk to the advocacy groups and find out, hey, we're a research organization. We don't engage in any lobbying, but what research would you find really useful as you try to pass this policy? Where are the research gaps? What data would be helpful to influence legislators? As a researcher, I can provide and produce that data, and it's not lobbying activity for me to do research that lobbying organizations are later on going to find useful in their work. Or if you work at a government agency, you've got all sorts of data. You work at a public health department, for example. What public health data do these organizations need in order to make the case for stronger public health regulations, for example? You know, if you run a Head Start center or a pediatrician's office, can you host a visit with a legislator so that those legislators can understand the challenges facing your local community? Can you put voter registration information at the front desk? Those are things that aren't lobbying. It's not lobbying necessarily to host a legislator's visit, as we're going to talk about in just a minute. But boy, does that make a strong impact on those legislators to see the water dripping from the ceiling in your Head Start center and to say, hey, we need a new roof, right? We need funding for the roof, or to meet with your parents' council at your Head Start center so that you can understand how important it is to clear out the backlog and expand Head Start so that everyone is able to participate if they want to. Those are the types of non-lobbying visits that really touch legislators at their heart. You know, if you're a preacher, preachers can preach about these issues that impact their congregants. So reach out to clergy to educate them. If you're, you know, getting all of the groups on board, even if they're strange bedfellows, right? Think about who you can include in your coalition for grassroots organizing to change policies. All of the groups on this slide right now, all of them have a role to play, but it might not be a lobbying role necessarily. So think about in your grassroots organizing how to get everybody involved, regardless of whether they're going to lobby or not. And then for those groups that are going to be involved with lobbying, we're going to talk about how to get their toes right up to the line. You know, to understand how to get your toes up to the line, first we need to know where that line is. And that's the definition of lobbying under these IRS rules. So there's direct lobbying, which are communications with legislators, and then there's grassroots lobbying, which are communications with public that are aimed to try to pressure legislators into voting a certain way. So the first type of lobbying, and we're going to share out this information to everyone, so you don't have to be trying to write it all down or take notes too fast. But we'll share out a cheat sheet with all of these definitions. But direct lobbying has three elements. It's a communication directly with a legislator or staffer about specific legislation, and it has to reflect the organization's view on that legislation. And what that means is if you eliminate any one of those three elements, it's just not lobbying. And you can use a restricted non-lobbying foundation grant to pay for the communication. For example, if you're talking to legislators or staff, but you're not talking about legislation, you can use non-lobbying foundation grant money for that. So let's break it down. It's a communication directly with legislators or staffers. So we're talking everything from a face-to-face meeting, emails, phone calls, anything where it's just between you and them. Yeah. So for example, I have a client who bought a billboard outside of a legislator's district office, and it said, Senator Hernandez, vote yes on S-226 to keep kids healthy. That is not a direct lobbying communication because that's a billboard, and anyone who drove by that strip mall would be able to see that billboard. So it didn't count as direct lobbying, even though you knew that Senator Hernandez and her staff were going to see it every time they walked in and out of that district office. That organization leveraged the lobbying definitions to say, hey, we're not going to pay for this with direct lobbying money. It's a communication to the public, so we'll need to think about it when we talk about grassroots lobbying. But direct lobbying are really only communications directly with that legislator or their staff member. So it's a communication with the legislator or staffer on specific legislation. Now, obviously, that's bills that have been introduced. It also includes ballot measures. And the reason it includes ballot measures is a ballot measure is like ancient Greece with a direct democracy, right? Where all of the voters in the community are voting on a new law to impose on that community. What it means is, as a 501c3 organization, you can spend lobbying dollars to influence ballot measures in your state. Now, you might have to register and report under state campaign finance rules, especially if you're raising money to pay for your ballot measure work. But if you're using just general money from the organization's treasury and you're not raising new money to influence that ballot measure, it's really easy in Florida for C3s to get involved with influencing ballot measures. You just have to report the activity, on through campaign finance rules, but also you have to treat it as direct lobbying under these IRS rules. And I haven't read here also, specific legislation includes legislative proposals that haven't been introduced yet, but you're talking with enough specificity that a legislator knows what you want them to introduce. So let me give you an example, because that's a little bit of a gray area here. So let's say you're talking to a legislator and you say, hey, we need to raise the minimum wage in Florida to make sure that all families have money to put a roof over their head and put food on the table. That's not specific enough for that legislator to know what to introduce. That doesn't tell them what kind of a minimum wage law they should introduce. And so if you talk to a legislator and just tell them to raise the minimum wage, that's not lobbying. That's just talking to a legislator about a general policy issue, but you're not talking to them about specific legislation. Now, if you said to that legislator, hey, we need to raise Florida's minimum wage to $15 an hour and eliminate the discrepancy for tipped workers by 2027, now they know exactly what to introduce. And so that would be treated as direct lobbying. But what I want you guys to think about here is, how can you structure communications with legislators so that it's not lobbying, right? If you're talking to a legislator and you're not giving specificity about what you want them to introduce, or you're not talking about a specific bill, it's just not lobbying. And you can pay for your time using a restricted foundation grant. Or if your organization takes the position, hey, we don't do any lobbying at all, you're still able to talk to legislators about policy issues that affect your communities. So for example, when Representative Dunkley went and visited an early learning center, the Greater Horizons Academy, she learned all about early childhood education challenges that families in the area are facing. And it really helped to solidify her support for early childhood education. And, it opened her eyes, and she also got to have some fun. But it's a totally non-lobbying activity to have her come and visit, because she wasn't talking about legislation with a bunch of 3-year-olds. And she wasn't even talking about legislation when she was talking to the teachers or talking to the principal of the Greater Horizons Academy. She was there just to talk about the big picture policy issues. And so I want all of your organizations to think about what can your organization do to get legislators, whether they are city council members or state representatives or members of Congress, to come and see the communities that you're serving. Talk to them about the problems in your community. And if you tell the legislator and their staff on the front end, hey, we're talking about the problems in our community, but we're not going to be addressing any specific legislation, you can pay for all of that time using non-lobbying funds. So any questions about direct lobbying here before we move on to the grassroots lobbying? All right, well, if you do have questions, feel free to pop them in the chat box or just raise your hand. So I said that there were two types of lobbying. There's direct lobbying. Direct lobbying was directly talking to legislators. And grassroots lobbying is the other type, where you're talking to the public. This is, for example, that billboard outside of Senator Hernandez's office, right? Any kind of a communication to the public, whether it's a billboard or a tweet or a TV ad or a rally, falls into this category of grassroots lobbying. And here we've got 4 elements. It's got to be a communication to the public. It's got to reflect a view on specific legislation. And it has to have what the IRS defines as a call to action. And so that's the key part, is this call to action. So if you look at this chart, if you've got a communication to the public that reflects a view on specific legislation, and it doesn't have a call to action, it's just not lobbying. So you can use your restricted foundation non-lobbying funds for communications to the public about legislation. As long as it's got no call to action, it's just not lobbying. So what is a call to action specifically? So the IRS defines it as, 1, asking people to call their legislator, or some other things that give them enough of a nudge to want to contact the legislator. So providing the legislator's contact information, for example, or identifying a legislator as being neutral or opposed to our position on the bill. So for example, if that billboard said, "Yay, Senator Hernandez, we're so glad you're going to vote for S226 to keep kids healthy," I'm busy. If I see that billboard, I'm just going to keep driving. I'm going to be like, "Yay, I'm glad that Senator Hernandez is going to do the right thing, but I don't need to reach out and call her." But if it said, "Senator Hernandez, get off the fence and help kids by voting for S226, now I might want to take some time out of my busy day to call Senator Hernandez, even though that billboard didn't say, call Senator Hernandez. So we can structure our communication strategically to think about what's going to maximize our grassroots lobbying dollars. So I want to give an example. So I had a client that was a Safe Streets organization, and they were running a campaign in a city to pay for more sidewalks, crosswalks, and better public transportation. They were trying to get more funding for that. They were going to run $100,000 on bus wraps, right? Those wrapping the buses with a message. And the bus wraps were going to say, call your city council member and tell them to vote for this funding package for sidewalks, crosswalks, and public transit. They didn't have $100,000 worth of grassroots lobbying money. And so we sat down and we thought about it. And I said, look, you're the Safe Streets people. You don't want anyone dialing their cell phone when a bus drives by them. If they're sitting in their car, you don't want them calling on their car phone. And more importantly, no one's going to call their city council member just because they see a bus drive by them. So these bus wraps aren't going to generate any actual calls to the city council. So what we did instead was we spent $60,000 on bus wraps that just said the city council should pass this bill for more sidewalks, crosswalks, and public transit in our city. Because it didn't have a call to action, those bus wraps were totally non-lobbying. And then what they did is they spent $10,000 on bus shelter ads. You know, those ads in bus shelters are super cheap. And so what we did is we made the bus shelter ads grassroots lobbying by putting a QR code right in those ads that said, if you want more money for sidewalks, crosswalks, and public transit, click here and contact your city council member right now. Now, the people in those bus shelters, by definition, they're the ones using sidewalks, crosswalks, and public transit. They have a phone in their hand, and they've got time in their hands because the buses don't run that frequently in their town. And so for $10,000, we generated a ton of calls to the city council because it was a really easy, high impact way to get people to contact their city council member. Had a really high return on investment for investing grassroots lobbying dollars. And for $60,000 of non-lobbying foundation grant money on those bus wraps, we really elevated the visibility of the issue. So what you want to think about is, how can we spend non-lobbying dollars to make our issue highly visible in our community? And then how do we spend a little bit of lobbying dollars to generate a lot of contacts so that people start contacting their legislators? And you want to think strategically, how can we use these rules so that we're crafting our communications so that the expensive stuff, the expensive stuff would be a report or a video or something like that. We want our report and our video to not have a call to action on the end of it. Instead, the report or the video should say, hey, if you want to get involved with this issue, go to womensfundofmiamidade.org and sign up for our email list. Get involved with us. And that way we can build a list of names. That way you can do some good grassroots organizing, generating a lot of names, and you can reach out to those people and later on contact them with a lobbying message. So we got a question here in the chat box. Is it direct lobbying if you make a direct response to a legislator on their social media, and is it a viewpoint with a call to action? So yeah, so if a legislator on social media, posts on social media and you respond to that legislator, then you're communicating directly with a legislator. And if you're talking about legislation on social media with that legislator, it's direct lobbying because you're talking directly to a legislator about legislation. But that's fine. Like, we're not saying don't lobby. By all means, you should lobby. And if social media is the way that legislator engages with the public, then you're going to have a really high impact by talking to that legislator on social media. And it doesn't take very much of your time at all, right? You're not spending an hour a day on social media with that legislator. You're probably spending 10 minutes tweeting back and forth with them, or whichever platform you're using. So it's direct lobbying, but it's probably a really effective way to get into that legislator's head. It's probably a really good way to get that legislator's ear on social if that's the way they prefer to communicate. Some legislators, it's more important to go in and meet with them one-on-one in their office. Some legislators, they're only going to listen to a big donor, right? You need to figure out who is that legislator and how do they communicate. And I want to take John's question one step further. So let's say we're on social media as an organization. If we post a tweet talking to a legislator, if we mention a legislator in a tweet or any other social media post, take a look at one of these bullet points of a call to action. If we provide a legislator's contact information, the IRS treats that as a call to action. So if we tag a legislator in our social media post, so for example, if we're on X or Twitter, X now, whatever, if you're on X and you write @send Warren, and then post a tweet, that's going to be, it tags her, so that provides her contact information. So it's treated as grassroots lobbying. But again, as I said, it's a super cheap way to do your communication. So you're going to get a high engagement rate in the public. A lot of other people might also tweet at Senator Warren. And because you've tagged her, it then makes sure that she or her staff sees all of those tweets. As opposed to if you spelled her name out, then you're not providing contact information. You might not have any kind of a call to action in that tweet. You could spend non-lobbying dollars on it then. But social media, because it's so cheap and has a high engagement rate, it's probably a good place to be investing your lobbying dollars. Other questions about the grassroots lobbying definition before I dive into a couple of examples. So Salinas asks a great question. What initial steps would you recommend for someone with no political background but strong community ties to start engaging in grassroots lobbying effectively and legally? Great question. If you don't have a strong political background, but you've got good community ties, how do you get your community to follow along and contact their legislators? I would say that anyone with strong community ties knows how to do this because it's about making those personal connections with folks. So I think the first step is think about what issue matters to the people in that community, right? What is the policy issue that you're going to engage on that's going to have a really big impact on people? And if it's the first, if it's your first foray into getting involved with legislation, think about something that's going to be relatively easier so that you can get a win, right? You want to get people engaged on things that you have more of a chance of winning on, or that are really close and important to their heart as a community member. So pick an issue, for example, talking about the impacts of extreme heat on pregnant women, really high impact issue that the Women's Fund of Miami-Dade is involved with. So pick an issue that matters to them, figure out who's the decision maker who can deliver on that issue, and engage with that person. Have folks in your community reach out to that person, get them to send emails to that person, for example, or make phone calls to that person. What I would recommend also is, because you don't have a strong political background, perhaps, I bet you actually have a stronger political background than you give yourself credit for, but you've got strong community connections. Ask around, and who in your community knows that decision maker? Who in your community knows that city council member or the mayor or that state representative or state senator who can deliver on that issue? Have that person ask the legislator, based on their personal connection, hey, can you come to a community meeting and talk to folks in the church basement, or talk to folks in my living room, or talk to folks at this Head Start Center about this issue we really care about? That way, people in the community will see that their legislator is really just one of them, and they'll develop that confidence to reach out and talk to that legislator. So figure out who it is that can deliver on your policy issue. Think about who might have a connection to that person, and bring people together so that they can meet with that legislator. Legislators want to know, and legislators want to develop connections to people in your community. And so they'll show up. If you can pull together a dozen people, you can get a legislator to show up and meet with you in your living room. And it can be really effective. And most importantly, it'll be empowering to that community to see that their engagement matters. And they'll then want to build on that by talking and reaching out to legislators in the future, by following up on your email campaign or your text messaging campaign or whatever it is. So I'm glad you asked that question. Thank you. And follow up and let us know how it goes as you do those things to build on that grassroots organizing. So I wanted to share a couple of examples of ways that organizations have used their non-lobbying dollars to really be effective at pushing legislation. And so, Selena's thinking about sort of these initial steps of what you can do. One thing that organizations will often do is they'll produce a fact sheet about a bill. So, for example, Healthcare for All in Massachusetts was trying to expand affordable coverage. There was a bill that mattered, there was a bill that they really wanted to pass. So they wrote a fact sheet about this bill. Keep in mind, they're talking about legislation. They're reflecting a view on legislation. They're talking about what the legislation does so that people can understand. And then at the end, it says, if you care about this issue, contact Alex or Ashley and it provides their email addresses. So this is a communication that reflects a view on legislation. There's no call to action on it. So they distributed this fact sheet about this bill broadly to the public. So it's a public communication about a bill. There's no IRS-defined call to action, so they used non-lobbying dollars to create this fact sheet. They got it out to clergy, they got it out to all their coalition allies, they got it to journalists, they got it to podcasters so that podcasters could talk about this issue. They really distributed it far and wide to help get people excited about the issue. And then because they had distributed it to the public as non-lobbying activity, they could pay for the time it took to write this fact sheet with non-lobbying dollars, but it also meant they had materials to hand out at Lobby Day when they went to talk to the members of their state legislature about why this bill was so important. So they were thinking strategically, like, hey, let's create materials that'll be useful for the whole public, useful for accomplishing our grassroots organizing around passing this bill, but also they're going to also be useful when we talk to legislators later on about why we need them to vote yes on this bill. The other example I want to share comes from Baltimore, Maryland, where the Heart Association and Sugar Free Kids Maryland were trying to pass a bill. And so they wrote an op-ed for Pastor Kevin Slayton, and they pitched it to the Baltimore Sun. It takes a lot of time. My background before I was in law school, I was a communications director at a nonprofit. It takes a long time to write and research and pitch an op-ed. So they wanted to use non-lobbying dollars to do it. And they did. And the op-ed, I know it's going to be small on your screen. It says, the city council should pass this bill to ban sugary drinks from kids' menus. On Monday, the city council is going to vote on the Healthy Kids Meal Bill. This bill would make a big difference in supporting parents' desire for a healthy life for Baltimore's children. The legislation is good policy. Passing the city Healthy Meal Bill will make a big difference in our children's lives. Because it was in the newspaper, it's a public communication. It reflects a view on legislation, but there's no call to action here, right? There's no call to action. It doesn't say call your city council member, because no one in the city council, no one who reads an op-ed in the newspaper sitting at their kitchen table is going to call their city council member just because the op-ed said, so call your city council member. Everyone on the city council, of course, reads the Baltimore Sun every morning, so it had a big impact on those legislators. And these nonprofits, because they knew the op-ed was going to run on Sunday morning, they had all of their coalition allies teed up with social media posts and with emails that they sent to their lists as soon as the op-ed was published. They said in these emails, hey, check out this op-ed from Pastor Kevin Slayton. If you want to join us in supporting a bill to protect our kids, call your city council member right now. Here's the phone number for the city council member. Call them right now. Here are their email addresses. Email them and tell them you want them to vote yes on this bill. So all the time they spent on the op-ed was non-lobbying, but then the 15 minutes that they spent on social media was a lobbying communication, but that social media and that email was going to have a much higher engagement rate, a much higher return on investment for getting people to actually contact their city council members than if they had put a call to action in the op-ed itself. So Eric asks, how does this work? I'm going to take Kamali's question, then Eric's question. I'll do Kamali's question first. Based on the last example, since the call to action was not legislative, was it acceptable use of non-lobbying funds? And he's talking about this. And he's exactly right. Or I'm sorry, I'm not positive. I apologize there. Where it says, for more information, contact Healthcare for All, Alex Sheaf at Alex's email address and Ashley's email address here. That's not a call to action under the IRS definitions. So this meant that because they distributed the fact sheet to the public, it reflects a view on legislation, but there's no call to action. It's a non-lobbying communication. But they generated a whole lot of names. It's important to build names. That's, everyone who's a grassroots organizer knows that that list is what's so important. So they could later on follow up with those people. And so exactly, Kamali, based on this example, the call to action was not a legislative call to action. It wasn't a call to action under the IRS definitions that'll be on the fact sheet that I'll send you guys all. So it's non-lobbying piece. Vero says at the end of the day, it's all about having an effective call to action. That's exactly right. Think strategically about when you're going to generate a lot of contacts and use your lobbying dollars for when you're going to need to move your legislator. Eric says, how does it work when you have a supermajority that's against your issues? You might not pass your issues through the supermajority, but you can generate passion and excitement through your community, and the supermajority will feel that pressure. And if the community recognizes the supermajority is out of step with the issues that they want to be passing, people in the community will, that frustration, they'll take out that frustration on those legislators when they show up at town halls. C3s can't get involved with elections in terms of supporting or opposing candidates, but the people that you've motivated will have their own choices of what to do. And then last thing before I turn it on over to Yolanda, Lourdes asks, to clarify, using social media as grassroots lobbying. Social media is only grassroots lobbying if you include a call to action and refer to legislation. Using social media and asking people to call their legislator about a big policy issue, but not talking about specific legislation, that would be non-lobbying. And it would also, if you use social media to talk about a bill, but you don't include an IRS call to action, that also would be non-lobbying. So I'll include a little bit more information about that with the information that I send out to Amy. And I'm going to turn it back over to Mario right now. And I really appreciate everyone for having me today. And I wish I could have been there in person, but I wish you all have a great, great day and learn a ton of stuff. Mario?
If you have a few more minutes for us, we're going to see if there are a few more questions for you, because we do have we had a few more people who had questions. Do you have a couple more minutes, Alan, or are you?
Yeah, I can stay a few more minutes. Sure. I just didn't want to cut into Yolanda's time.
No. It's terrific. We've got it built in. So, I want to say that the reason I added my jacket now is because I want you to have a visual impression about what Alan's talking about, which is about taking up space, right? There's no question that everybody here everybody individually has their own range of comfort with what is advocacy, and maybe you'd even want to talk about the word lobbying. But us taking up space is the most important thing that we could be doing right now, right? Does anybody have any specific questions here in the audience for Ellen? So we've got some live ones here. 1 second. There we go. We even have microphones. Isn't this team the best? A little applause for the women's fund team. Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
So my question is around, what is the difference asking or going to session to talk to legislators about appropriations versus, an organization not being an advocacy organization, right? So that's where we struggle sometimes at Chapman because we are not an advocacy organization. However, we do try to go after appropriations for the issues that we're solving for, right?
Can you tell everybody what Chapman is? Because not everybody might know.
Sorry, Chapman Partnership is the largest emergency housing provider in Miami-Dade County. We house over 800 residents in our 2 centers, serving people that are experiencing homelessness. We're honored to have Yolanda Jackson as a board member. So that's what Chapman is.
I would say two things. A, I don't believe that there's any organization that's not an advocacy organization. To say that you're not advocating for unhoused people is baloney. Two, your organization, your board might take the position that you don't lobby. And if the organization isn't paying for lobbying, then the issue on appropriations is, going back to that slide, remember, a communication is about legislation only if you're being specific about the legislation. And so you can go in and say, hey, we need more funding to take care of unhoused people. We need more funding for shelters. We need more funding for food, for services, etc. And if that's what you're saying, then you're not talking about specific legislation. But if you say, hey, we need $6.5 billion increase in in food services because the federal government is cutting off food services. So we need you to increase this line item of the budget by $6.5 million. Now you're talking with enough specificity that the IRS would treat that as lobbying. And so that's the distinction of what's lobbying and what's not, is when you go in and talk about that appropriation, are you being so specific that they know exactly what to vote for? Or is it just, hey, we need more money for X, Y, or Z, activities, right? In the big picture globally. And, there are situations where a board of one organization says, hey, we don't want to be involved with lobbying because this isn't our lane, right? And you work with your coalition allies to say, hey, we can't do lobbying on this. We can bring legislators in to spend a night at our shelter, for example, or we can bring legislators in to serve a meal and understand the needs of how important it is to get more money for as the cost of ingredients is going up. That's non-lobbying, is giving them that experience of serving meals and talking to your food service, your food procurement team. Totally non-lobbying, so you're not talking about legislation. And set up with your coalition allies who do lobbying to say, hey, on Thursday, we're meeting with Senator Jackson. We're going to serve her some meals. Why don't you come and establish a relationship with her so that next week you can go into her meeting and say, hey, we met at Chapman. It was great. And you saw how important it is for them to serve high nutrition food. We need an increase of $6.5 million in the procurement budget for this, so that it's your ally who's doing that lobbying and you're setting it up with the non-lobbying visit. It goes back to that whole ecosystem of policy change kind of thing.
Questions from the live before I jump in, because I've got a big one. Alan, I know that a lot of my colleagues who run nonprofits have signed on today. So have you seen, as we're trying to take up space and we're trying to not be overly affected by the planned chaos, we're trying to take up space and do what we need to do and be even stronger in the community than we've ever done before. Are you seeing that anybody's going after any of the nonprofit leaders or boards? Because I'm very conscious, I've been to all 6 lobbying and advocacy sessions, training sessions, but I've learned something. I've learned a lot already today, right? I'm not cavalier, I'm very careful about not being partisan, because it's also something I believe in for organizations, very important not to be partisan. And I am careful, but I'm also, bold, right? And so I am not writing down every minute, and I try and be conscious, but is anybody gonna come after me because I didn't write down the minutes that I was doing what I thought was advocacy and somebody else interprets it as lobbying?
Well, there's like 6 questions in there, Maria.
You know me well.
I'll take 2 of those questions. Question 1 was, is the government going after nonprofits? And the answer is, I mean, Harvard's a nonprofit. They make a lot of profit, but they're a nonprofit. There are nonprofits that the government is going after. Do we expect that there will be more? Probably. Do I expect that the Women's Fund of Miami-Dade is going to be one of the top 150 that they go after? No, right? So every organization needs to think about its own risk tolerance and the likelihood that it'll be targeted for activities. Organizations that work with immigrant populations that I work with, I've got a bunch of organizations that are a higher risk of being targeted because of the populations they're working with. So organizations need to think about their own risk tolerance and their own threat level and think about how much work they're going to do. And this will be in the memo that I'll circulate, how much work they need to do of tracking every minute because of the likelihood that they'll be investigated versus, an organization like Women's Fund of Miami-Dade. If you're not tracking every minute, you're still able to, if investigated, if there's an IRS audit, you'd still be able to go back to your calendar and reconstruct how you're spending your time so you can come up with a reasonable demonstration of how you spent your time for those points. In general, if you're doing a lobby day, if you're doing advocacy, it's important to track your time so that you're able to defend it if you are investigated.
Thank you. There's another question over in the corner. And Vivi's running in her heels.
Can you talk a little bit about
Can
being
you
a
introduce yourself?
Can you talk a little bit about being a registered lobbyist, the pros and cons of that for an administrator or someone in a nonprofit organization, regardless of whether they're working with a lobbyist or not?
Florida has very specific rules about how much of your job has to be lobbying in order to have to register. And if you're doing that much lobbying that you have to register under Florida's requirements, then I say you should go ahead and do it. It's not that hard. The only downside is the amount of time it takes to register and report. And it's a pain. It's not a lot of pain. There's a lot of things. Everyone in this room does everything. There's a lot of things that are more painful than having to file lobbyist reports. It's a hassle. It's yet another thing that you've got to do. You've got a lot on your plates, and I can understand why people don't want to have to register. And I don't recommend registering unless you absolutely have to. But my view is that it's better to register and report so that you can advocate for your policy issues for your organization than to say, oh, we're not going to advocate for policy issues because I don't want to have to spend the time to register and report. It's not that big a hassle. It's not that big a downside. And, it's important to register and it's important to advocate for our policy issues.
Thank you all so much. No more questions here in the audience. I'm not seeing the chat, but I think you've been great at answering those as we go. We're going to launch the next poll while we thank Ellen so kindly for this incredible wealth of knowledge.
Well, thank you all for having me, and I really appreciate it.
And we will be circulating all the information that
Yep.
you're going to share with us. So
Yep.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Those of you who are here, there is food for you. We already showed you where the ladies and gentlemen's room and the non-binary rooms are, if anybody needs to be human. We do ask everybody to, um, um, participate if you want to. If you're at home, of course, you're running in and out and you're getting your own tea and your coffee. For those of you who don't need a little break, I'd like us to go ahead and share in the chat what were your biggest takeaways and what kinds of things you'll be thinking about. You can include anything there that you would like to see in the next session or that you'd like to see from your Women's Fund. Danny, I'm gonna ask you to make sure that I've had several people ask me today, how can I become more involved in the Women's Fund? And if you're okay, I'm gonna talk about that a little bit, because more than one person has asked, what? And you'll drop in the chat. So there's more than one way. We always say that this is your Women's Fund, and we are not kidding. We have such broad work because we're trying to leverage resources on behalf of women and girls in our community. So that touches everything. We talked earlier about the 4 programs and the 4 pillars. So coming to impact collaboratives, volunteering at one of our events is true. We have a more formal way to do it. And everybody who knows Daniela Luna loves Daniela Luna. And she spearheads not only the organization of these impact collaboratives and advocacy trainings, but she also spearheads our impact agents. Right? So easy to sign up. It's on our website. It's going to be in the chat. And if you're here in person, you can talk to Danny. And there's also a QR code that Vero's holding up here if you'd like to join us as an impact agent. It's not super time consuming or super onerous. It's just a great way to have like personal touch with the team, so we can tell you what's going on. There are also committees that we have for the Women's Fund. So we don't publish them all on our website all the time because I think it's better to have somebody who really kind of gets who we are before we open up to joining committees. But you are those people, whether you're online or you're here physically. I do want to tell you about the committees that we have. You've heard about the work we have. So let's start with the events. So Power of the Purse, Raise the Bar are signature events that are not only fundraisers, but they're community engagements. They're great networkers, etc. So if you're interested in supporting us in advancement, getting fuel for our mission, helping us to get silent auction items, sell tickets, sponsorships, all that kind of thing, our advancement committee is a really good way to get involved, because you know that to have all these events happen, you have to feel our mission. So it's a great way and everybody can help. So that's probably the easiest to join part of the advancement committee. We've got really fun, really cool things going on. So that's one. Today, especially importantly, we can talk about our legislative and advocacy committee. So the presentation that Viviana did earlier and the one pager that she put up before, and then may even share again, that's the fruit of the work of the legislative and advocacy committee. So we're looking at the things that really matter to women and girls in Miami-Dade County, often things that we're finding out in our research and our data collection, that we need resources towards these things. We're partnering with other people who are smarter than we are, because we're smart enough to do that. So we might be working with our friends and amazing leaders from the children's movement in Florida, who are following the committees and they're following the legislation on how we can affect early child learning and affect the business community by the positive work they're doing. We may be working with the YWCA, who's working on some specific kind of advocacy and I know. I'm so sorry to the people who are online that it's hard for me to speak loudly into the puck, which is the microphone that I have that you can hear. And please keep on complaining if you can't hear me well, because I will move again. Anyway, so legislative and advocacy, it's a great place. Again, these are not crazy difficult committees. It's not like are gonna be spending 2 hours a week on your committee work. It's more like 4 hours or 6 hours a month. So we do, and we'd love to have you engaged, and that's a great way to, the more you learn, the more you want to do. That's what happened to me with the Women's Fund, at least. Who knew the first time I ran into a power of the purse or went to a training that I get so stuck? I mean, look at me now. Look at me now. We have other committees. One of them's really active, and Viviana also runs that from the staff side with amazing volunteer co-chairs. And that the research committee is really looking at not only what we need to do for research and giving qualitative support for Viviana, but also helping to spread our research. And we've got really good stuff. Viviana's created a tool called the Miami-Dade Self-Sufficiency Standard that she's working with University of Washington data, that you can plug in a family configuration and it will tell you what you would need to be able, what you need to earn to be able to have basic sufficiency. So housing, early child learning, healthcare, food, clothing, and that will help you on your advocacy. We could use every single one of us and 10 of your friends, and we would still be scratching the surface of all the advocacy that we could be doing for the incredible tools that we have right now to get across the county. So I could not encourage you more. We are fun. We are at your service. Oh my goodness, maybe if I stand here. I'm standing in front of Danny. Is that better? Then I can see you all. Okay, is that better? So I'm sure that this amazing team is posting here how you can become more involved with us. Once you're really into this work and you become really involved for a few years, we also have board service. And so there's special committees that you would need to be on our board to be able to be on the finance or the governance committee, because that gets into the more serious responsibilities, fiduciary responsibilities, and a heck of a lot more time that we need you to be involved. I don't think I've missed any committees, have I? No? So that's what we've got going on. Anybody have any questions about any of that stuff? No, okay. Yolanda's with us, right? So I'm going to just tell you sort of briefly how we began here. The Women's Fund did not have a legislative and advocacy committee when we took over. We knew things that we cared about, but we didn't feel comfortable. So we, at the time, when I joined the board many months ago, there's somebody, her name is Vicki Lopez, who's now a state representative, representing part of Miami-Dade, who was on our board at the time, and she volunteered to do a training. And you can see all of those trainings on her website, and you can go back there. Just think how far we've come ever since there. And now we've had Alan and Yolanda now for these past 2 years joining us and giving us ever more sophisticated trainings. I would be remiss in saying that we hope for this time next year, we will have even more amazing partners with us. So the Junior League does amazing work, and they do some serious advocacy across the state, across the nation. So they partnered with us here. The YWCA, we love you. They're great partners in all good crimes. They lead on some things, we lead on other things, amazing partners. The Miami Women's Club is one of our partners here today, and they do amazing work. They did the first library here in Miami-Dade. I don't know if you knew that. And they also work really closely with us on domestic violence prevention and awareness, for example, but they're not the only women's clubs here. So some of you might have a contact on one of those. Many organizations, we welcome you to contact Daniela and to partner with us this time next year. Also a very important upcoming town hall that we will have within this umbrella as well of our convenings and our impact collaboratives. We have an annual county budget town hall with our mayor. What is that? As you're gonna learn from the amazing Yolanda Jackson right now, we need to follow the money. Budgets are a huge indicator of what policies are gonna be supported, and they're gonna have some teeth behind them. You can have a lot of laws, policies, that nothing really happens because there's no funding behind them. And so we've had the luxury of working with our mayor over the past few years, but we hope to do this for the rest of our history. Whoever the county mayor is looking at our county budget and seeing how it supports women and girls. So we don't have the date yet because it will depend on Mayor Levine Cava's schedule, but heads up, in August, we will be doing that as well. So with that, the amazing Yolanda Jackson, I feel like you're here in person because this month you're sitting next to me, and I know you were gonna be here, but tell everybody where you are, Yolanda, and welcome.
Good morning, good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I am live and in color in Tallahassee, Florida. So you're getting this hot off the press. I do have a slide, but I wanted to go through a few things. First of all, that previous presentation was amazing. I learned a lot, took a lot of notes, and he said one thing that I totally, well, a couple of things I totally agree with, but it's better to register than to not. It's not worth the hassle. In fact, our speaker, Danny Perez, at the beginning of the session, indicated that they would be checking to see if people were registered properly. There's also an additional requirement that you register per issue. And so we're all on pins and needles to make sure that we dot all those I's and cross all those T's. But we are here in Tallahassee on, what is this, June 5th? Way beyond what we were supposed to be. We were supposed to be done the first week of May. And as you see, we are here. The legislature extended the session, not a special session, but extended the session so that they could deal with the budget, which they have to do by June 30th. Otherwise, state employees and all the other good stuff that the state writes a check for will not happen. And so it is really unprecedented times in a number of ways. We talked about some of those policy issues, but I wanted to take the time to kind of go focus on the budget, focus on some things that you need to be considering as you advocate not only for this organization, but and its pillars, but also organizations that you may be involved in. And so I always like to start out by first with the basics. That is, all politics is local. Wherever you see in the grocery store, at events, at church, those are the ones that really are closest to you. And that's a great place to start because all politics is local. I'm dealing with an issue right now, you saw me with my camera off, that affects only Miami-Dade County. You've been reading about the schools of hope. That's a big issue here for a number of reasons. And so we're dealing with that. That affects Miami-Dade County directly. The school board superintendent was up here on Tuesday. I hope I'm not saying too much because I know we're being recorded, but it's real time. It is real time. And so all politics is local. You need to be paying attention. The politics in Miami-Dade County have changed a little bit, and it affects us from picking up your trash all the way to Washington. So I wanted to start there. Because we are real time. So we're going to pretend today that you are lobbying the legislature in this budget session like I am. So first of all, you have to know your legislators. And that sounds so elementary and so basic, but we're going to take a little test. I know you have a survey. How many people know who their state representative is? All right, raise your hand high because I'm gonna make call on somebody. I can see colors. All right. What about your state senator? How many people know who their state senator is? All right. Not enough hands have gone up. So either you don't know them or you're not participating. Which one? But that's the first step. That is the first step. You have to know who the heck you're talking to. And granted, some of these legislators, you will see generally, I mean, everybody, wants to connect with the speaker, connect with the Senate president, but all politics is local. My state representative is Representative Fabrizio. My state senator is Senator Avila, and they know that I live in their district. So that's your first task. Let them know that you live in the district. Once you find out what district you live in. So that is, you can't advocate if you don't know who you're talking to. And all of this idea about supermajority, yes. But let me tell you something. If a legislator, and I think I said this the last time I was here, if a legislator knows that you live in their district, they're going to listen to you before they listen to the lobbyists. I know you don't believe that, but it's true. They will listen to you before they listen to a lobbyist. Because much of what we do is nonpartisan food fights. The doctors versus the nurse practitioners, the nudists versus the Christians. I mean, it is generally food fights and not based on a lot of partisan activities, even though that's what we hear about all the time. We hear about partisan activities, but at the end of the day, I have found consistently, whether it be Republican, Democrat, or in between, that legislators listen to their constituents. And you have a lot of leverage in doing so. And I see people in the chat agreeing with me. But know your legislator. Get to know the things that matter to them, things that they're passionate about. If you live in Representative Vicky Lopez's district, I can tell you right now, as I've known her for a long time, but she's a very important voice in this particular session because she's working on affordable housing. But I can tell you that there are some things that I do know about it. I know that a restoration of rights is still very important to her. I know that she is a local person. Women's issues are important to her. She has children. I know that her sons are important to her. So know your legislator, not only just by name, by district, but by some of the things that they are passionate about. And we will be moving into, and I'll talk about this in the, let's see if we have, okay. I'll be talking to you more about what's to come in terms of politics and what the landscape is going to look like after this session. But anyway, know your legislator. All right, so now that we know the legislator, you're looking at your voter registration cards so that you will leave here knowing who they are. The next important thing is to know the current state of affairs. You just have to have a sense, excuse me, a sense of what's going on in Miami-Dade County, what's going on in the state as a whole, and the political slants that are being taken. I told you, most of the issues are not partisan. Clean water is not partisan. They made fluoride in the water partisan, but clean water is not partisan. Sorry, I'm getting a ping from one of the senators. The other thing that you need to know is that we're in a supermajority. And what does that really, really mean? What it means to us as lobbyists is that we have a supermajority in the House. We have a supermajority in the Senate, and then every cabinet member is of one party as well as the governor. So you would think that we would be singing Kumbaya and skipping through the halls of Tallahassee. Well, that's not happening. That's why we're here. The House and the Senate can't seem to get along. And for lobbyists, it's like your parents having a domestic disagreement, but you really can't say anything. You just kind of have to watch and see what happens because you don't want to really take sides. So that's what's happening. That is actually what's happening. The House and the Senate could not agree on very important issues. So first, the governor came out with his budget, and the governor said, okay, we're going to take a $3 billion cut. And it was kind of, okay, he wants to cut the budget, he wants to build a bigger surplus, and okay. But then shortly thereafter, the legislature started talking about what their budget was going to look like. And from the time that they do their budget, then they do what they call allocations. So just like you do in your household budget, you have a certain amount of money that you're going to spend on a certain number of things, but you have to know how much you're working with. When I was growing up, we used to get an allowance, and that was the amount of money that went in that envelope, and that's what I had to deal with, and that's what the legislature is doing. So the governor's budget is illusory. It doesn't have to balance or anything. The House and the Senate budgets do have to balance. So going on, they could not agree. What are some of the things that they could not agree with? One was something called rural renaissance. That was something that the Senate president wanted. Ben Albritton is from Wauchula. And if you don't know where Wauchula is, exactly. He is a rural guy. He's a rural guy. And of course, the speaker, Danny Perez, is from Miami-Dade. But the Senate president said from the beginning, I want to do things to enhance the lives of people in rural communities. And not only just rural communities, they have something called rural access communities, things like Belglade, Pahokee. They're in big counties, but they're still rural. I think Florida City or Homestead may be able to claim some of that as well. But these are rural communities that have been ignored in his eyes. So on the House side, though, Danny Perez says, we're going to give tax relief. And what we want is to reduce, at the end of the day, to reduce the sales tax. And there went the parent fight, where the House wanted to do theirs, the Senate wanted to do theirs, and each budget has to eventually match. When they don't match, we are engaged in something called conference, and that's what we're doing here. We're talking about ways that we can match so that we can come out with a budget by what? June 30th. Because if it's not out by June 30th, then we got a problem. So the conference is going on now, but those very core issues, sales tax, rural renaissance, have been the topic from the beginning. And now we're getting down to who's going to give in. Now, mind you, the governor, I haven't talked much about the governor's priorities. The governor wants to do tax relief. Well, the governor was focused on what? Property taxes. He wanted to cut property taxes. And the legislature was like, no, because who's going to pick up the garbage? Because property taxes generally go to local efforts. But they're studying that. They created a task force or what they call a select committee to look at those kinds of issues. But right now, as we stand today, we still have not created a budget. We did the first step, and that is the legislature did get to allocations, and that's the reason we came back. So allocations say this: you have a big, this is your money, and you're going to divide it in pieces of pies. The biggest part of that budget is healthcare. Why? Because it has a lot of drawdowns. The next biggest part of that budget is education. And it goes on, whether it be corrections, those kind of things. So the governor is kind of over here, and we'll talk a little bit about hope. But the governor's over here. The Senate and the House are, duking it out with their priorities. And the issue becomes, and this is what, lobbyists are asking kind of behind closed doors, because you don't want to be the carrier of something that's not true. But behind closed doors, lobbyists are asking, at what point will they come to some kind of agreement, and who's going to side with the governor? Because it's a three-legged stool. It's the legislators, the Senate and the House kind of against, I wouldn't say against, but they're on the same side, a little bit different than what the governor's side is. And the question is, how can they get the governor comfortable? How can the House and Senate get comfortable with each other? And we just haven't gotten there yet. Why? Because the governor has the ultimate power, which is veto power. He can veto the budget, and we haven't talked about vetoes in a long time. Since vetoing the budget in a long time, probably, I don't know, maybe when Lawton Childs was governor, when Democrats were in a narrow majority. But the idea that we all be in the same family and can't figure out how to get a budget passed is historical in itself. So there's that threat of veto. So to say, for instance, if the legislature passes a budget and the governor doesn't like it because it doesn't have his priorities in it, one being property taxes, and he has a couple of other things that he would like to see happen, then he could veto the budget. But the one thing this time that's different is that because we have a supermajority, it is more likely, or I put the climate is better for an override of the veto. And you see it at the county level. And the mayor has, yes, Eric, that's what I'm talking about. So the mayor has overwritten some things she did with the fluoride treatment, all that kind of thing. And so the same thing happens in Tallahassee. The question is whether or not the House and the Senate can hold their votes to override the governor's actions. And as we get close to June 30th, that kind of discussion becomes even more important. The governor has a new legislative affairs director. She's only new to his office. She's not new to the process. It's going to be interesting how they work that out. So, recap. Supermajority House, that is 2/3 of the legislature are Republican or of one party. 2/3 of the Senate, 2/3 of the House. They have the raw numbers to override the governor. It is rumored, and I want to say rumored because I don't want you to go back and say I said it. The street committee says that there's enough to override in the House, but not quite in the Senate. So that's where we are right now. But we are working through the budget. We are close, but not done. We will, as we speak today, right now, this particular second, both the House and the Senate are dealing with some issues and bills related to the budget. The call or the task that they're given is only to deal with the budget and no substantive issues. So things that we were kind of concerned about, if you worked in a CRA or involved with a CRA, there was legislations to almost immediately do away with them. All of those kind of issues are off the table, except there's something called conforming bills. And these are instructions, if you will, that go along with the budget. And in years past, not recently, But in years past, the legislature has used that to put in substantive law. Why is that bad? Because you don't have a chance to have a hearing. You as a citizen don't get a chance to weigh in. And it's just not good practice to have a dictated bill that really hasn't had any vetting at all. You are the vetters. You are the vetters. And you would have no idea what they would put into a conforming bill, say for, what's a good example? Say for climate change, or even a better one. There had been some talk that there would be some language written into the budget that would say any dollars received cannot be used for DEI. That could be put in a conforming bill that goes along with the budget. And the governor would definitely sign the budget on that. That would be a way that, he could win. But those kinds of things, the conforming bills, if I say one thing that keeps me up at night, that would be one. Because you don't know what you're going to get. I think it was through Speaker Corcoran's tenure that we did a lot of substantive work in conforming bills. So just know that the budget doesn't necessarily only deal with numbers. It also deals with some policy. So let me mention a couple of other policy things that might are starting to affect the budget. And this is, once again, real time. If you saw my screen going off, I just got buzzed by a senator talking about this issue of Hope School. As you know, the Hope School is a big, big, big issue that seems to be affecting not only, and I don't want to get political, but understand that you need to understand, because all of this goes into the funding issues that our last speaker was talking about, the philosophy as it relates to not-for-profits and what you ask for and what you don't ask for. And if you're afraid now to give any money, if you're an administrator of funds, to give any money to something that has a label like Black or women or Latin or poor, all of those labels have been thrown into the DEI conversation. And I don't know that they really know what DEI means. I don't know that there's never been defined, but know that there is this thought that they may put something in the budget that has a blanket no DEI application. You get money, no DEI. And they've kind of done that in higher education. I think it's a little bit harder to do when you have private entities like the private colleges and universities, because the state really does not, although the state does give them some funds, they really don't govern them. So this whole idea of hope, which is a priority for the governor, that the First Lady was very a part of that. That we don't have a lieutenant governor, another unusual thing. Although I'm hearing that we will have one very shortly, and that's we can talk offline about who I think that might be. But it's so much up in the air. We have a new attorney general, right? We have a new attorney general that used to be the chief of staff, that has been pretty vocal. And so everything is changing. We have a couple of open seats in the Senate. We have a special race. Everything is happening at the time we're doing this budget. And all of those external issues are now impacting what they pass. So I want to stop there, and I know we were going to do questions at the end, but before I go into the technical budget, I just wanted to see if there were any burning questions. Yes, the young lady in the white suit.
I'll ask mine while you're running over there. Yolanda, can you address how we could, address the fact that in the budget, DEI might be included as a blanket? Is there an opportunity for us to know that that's coming and for us to advocate in any way, or is it just end up in the budget?
But that's the problem. It could just end up in the budget. Right now, it's nowhere. But we do have a speaker that is from Miami-Dade County. And I haven't seen it. I mean, I haven't heard that in a minute, but it's possible. Now, what I did hear was that what I did hear is that the former Senate President Kathleen Pasadomo was against it. Now, that's a street committee conversation. Please don't, one thing about lobbying and the lobbying corps, what we don't know, we're kind of put a spin on it. So I always preface it by it's the street committee. But we do have a former Senate President who is a woman who I understand has some problem with putting that as a blanket all across the budget. So I haven't heard that in a while. I think we have enough fish to fry that may not be too much of an issue. But to your point, say if we got wind that it was going to be in there. This is why the conforming language is so crazy. You don't get a chance to give your input. What will happen? That language won't be shown until the end. And I'll go through the stages of the budget, but it won't go into the end. And when you find out about it, it's almost too late because there is a time requirement of when the budget passes that it has to do what they call sit on the desk. Has to sit on the desk for at least 72 hours. So we plan to get the date that they're throwing around and said they're going to come back and vote on the budget on the 16th. So I'm counting back from the 16th, 72 hours, and that's when I know the budget has been done. But there's not an opportunity, there's a very small window of opportunity that if something goes into the budget, that you get a chance to say something about it. And that's the problem. We need to make sure that bills are filed, that those kind of policy issues are filed early so that citizens can have some discussion. So they put that in there, and that few days that the budget is not quite finished, and it goes up to what they call the big chairs, that's the chairs of appropriations, and then to the bump to the fourth floor, and that is to presiding officers. What's the likelihood that you get a chance to talk to the presiding officers? Hey, Danny, I know you're dealing with $112 billion budget, but you know what? I don't like that DI language. Would you take my call? Hell no, it's not going to happen. And that's the inherent problem of having policy language put in conforming bills. So I'm praying and hoping that that doesn't happen, but it could be anything. It could be, okay, we can't wear white shoes on, a pair of white shoes on. We can't wear white shoes on Thursday. It could be that, And so at a time where not a lot, some of the action that is being taken in this political process, whether it be Washington, not so much locally, but somewhat at the state level, where legislation becomes punitive, that's a concern. And that's the kind of language that's generally put at the last minute because it never would pass, even when we have a supermajority. All right? So I know that was a long answer to the question.
Hi, Miss Yolanda. I'm Jackie. I'm an Urban Paradise Guild. I've taken some appropriations workshops with you, and I was very excited to learn a little bit more about advocacy and lobbying through you. My question to you is, we work in the environmental world, so we're like DEI right now. There's certain words that we're trying to avoid. Can you give me a reality check on how it's looking right now for environmental causes? I know Yana Garcia have tried putting something with green infrastructure through. We've had to rebrand ourselves. Our AmeriCorps program was defunded because it's related to climate. However, our health is directly connected to the environment. I mean, it's only getting hotter, for water quality. The heat is an issue. I know we're talking about in the Women's Fund, pregnant women dealing with these heat issues, and this is a reality. So is there any hope, at least in this session, or should we wait a little bit for future sessions until things kind of, for lack of a better word, just kind of we navigate through this whole period right now?
Okay, so this too shall pass.
Yes.
Okay, this too shall pass. So breathe, wusa. It shall pass, and we'll get smarter about adjusting to the politics. The governor's going out in 26. President Trump is going out in 28. Much of what is being done, and this is street committee, I'm doing these disclaimers, is to set the stages to make you do exactly what you're doing now. You know, oh my God, I'm not going to apply for any money because we're not going to get it. Listen, I used to have orange hair when I was like 22. I have reinvented myself 30 times. You know, that's what we do. And that's what you have to do as advocates. You have to know what they're buying so you can sell it. Remember, with DEI, for example, and I use this example all the time. I don't know it's a good one, but people seem to understand. I have a little Afro thing going on here. When Walmart and Target got rid of their DEI programs, guess what? They didn't take my Afro Sheen products off the shelf. That's they're in the business of selling to consumers and all of that. And Target has felt some of the brunt of that. That's what you got to do. You got to fight back. Now, environmental issues, they're calling it something else. It's not climate change anymore, it's resiliency.
Right.
You know, so there you go.
Yeah.
You know, as my mother would tell me sometimes, get over yourself. They you know, they're calling it that, but this too shall pass, and it's your advocacy that allows the conversation to be shaped. If you don't say anything about the environment, nobody won't say anything. Now you just may have to speak differently. And I'm an eternal optimist. Otherwise, I couldn't be in this job. You have to figure out that you need to sell exactly what they're buying. If they're not buying climate change, but they're buying resiliency, or they're buying the hardening, they're doing that. It's okay if you're preventing a hurricane, if you're making sure that people don't die in a hurricane, you know, and you call it hardening. That's being funded. That's being funded in pots of money that's not even a legislative ask. Legislature puts some money over there, feds put some money over there for FEMA. FEMA passes it down to the state, and you get a chance to apply for it. So yes, it's not dead. It's not the topic of a huge topic because it's being overshadowed, but you can't represent South Florida like a Demi Posada that has Coral Gables, and I think she has a little bit of Little Vanna, that's a flooding area, and not be concerned. That's just not how it is. So keep talking, but knowing that you need to speak in the language that they are feeling comfortable in. Okay. Remember the orange hair? I used to have orange hair.
Oh, yes. Hi, Yolanda. So a couple quick things. Yes, I fear is the little killer, right? Two things. One, we love you. And two, time. So you talked about June 30th. And also you talked about the possibility of a veto and an overriding of the veto and the sitting on the desk. And can you time out these things for us and sort of give us a time horizon and a projection, even if this ranges of stability is not necessarily the word, but
Yeah.
back. You know what I'm saying?
Oh boy. So listen, that's a tough question. So I think I'm going to transition into my little chart. I think you guys have it there. Okay, so put on my little chart. It's an ugly chart, but it's my favorite chart. Okay, can you put it up, or I can share my screen if I can pull it up if you can't.
She's working on it.
Okay, so I'll start answering your question. So stability, I don't have an answer for that. Let me tell you what happened in one, and I'm going to continue to talk to you in real time because you need to understand that this stuff is happening in real time. And that's why so many people are starting to get advocates in Tallahassee. My client got a letter, an email day before yesterday, about 5 o'clock, that said, I know you applied for an appropriation for, ironically, well, I don't want to disclose who the client was. Let's say, say it had to do with something with maternal health. Just throw that out there. And we have some funding. We know you made the legislative request, but we have some funding that you would be available for this year. That is before June 30th. We need you to fill this out by June 30th, and we're going to award you this year. Now, they didn't even apply for it last year, but we're going to let you apply this year, because guess what? They have money they didn't use. It was $900,000 that they requested in this current legislative session for 25-26. So but because what we knew instinctively that all of this drama was going on, instinctively we encouraged clients, and what we did was we talked to the agencies first and let them know who we were, and they knew that that was an area that we were interested in, and that conversation is how we got to the agency. And guess what? The agency then reached out to us, and we don't have to fool around with that goddamn veto, because the money is already there. And that is money that, guess what? That department is an agency of the governor. So I don't have to worry about veto. But it's the advocacy, it's doing the extra stuff to know what they're buying. We knew that they were buying maternal health, so we put the request in, but we went back to the agency. So let's look at this chart, because this is really important of when and the timing of advocacy. Very, very important. So we're finishing June 30th. So that means, folks who get money in this budget, that there will be a very short window from the time that you're awarded something in the budget to the time they actually negotiate a contract. I have a client who won last year, and they just got their first check last month. So you have to be prepared for the long haul, which is really hard when you're trying to meet payroll, try to provide services. So I always tell my clients, get a line of credit, because you never know when you're going to get money from the state. It's like a borrowing in-law. You never know when you're going to get paid back, right? So this chart kind of takes you through the cycle, a budget cycle. And I know we're talking about budget too, but it'll give you an idea of when you need to be talking about your issues for next session. Now, where we are, and I don't have a pointer on here, but you can see at the top, it says legislature creates and passes a GAA. Okay, that's an appropriation, the General Appropriation Act, that's what GAA stands for. And so that's where we are now, right? That's where we are now. We're at that very top. Now, after that, after June 30th, the governor then will start looking at vetoes and whatever. But after that, after he's executed the budget, after the vetoes are done, they say with legislative consultation, and I say to that, ha ha, probably not. But maybe a little bit. But the governor then will start creating, and his agencies will start creating and implementing the budget that was passed. Very important. If you want to avoid the drama, and listen, I'm about to get my Social Security. I do not like drama. I do like that drama anywhere. So I'm going to start talking to the state agencies once I find out where the pots of money that the legislature created. I'm going to be talking to the agencies about how I could get a piece of it. Because I may not have been successful in the legislative process by doing what they call a legislative budget request. But there are other avenues, talking directly to the agency. And guess what? The agencies, they're lonely. They're in Tallahassee. They don't have anybody to talk to. Go visit them. Do a Zoom with them. Talk about what they are buying. They love, love, love talking to regular folks. They don't really like talking. They definitely don't like talking to lawyers, but they will talk to lobbyists, but they prefer to talk to you. And you know all of the ins and outs of what would work for a contract, what won't work for a contract, how many people you serve, how many people you think you can serve, what you know what's going on, who else is getting the money, all of that. So state agency then implements the budget that is going to pass at some point before June 30th. Okay, so that time between June 30th and January 1, when we go back to session, and let me just stop there. This coming year is 26 is an election year. Some legislation was passed. I want to say it was Senator Anna Flores that passed the bill that basically said in election years, we're going to start the session early in January. And let me tell you, lobbyists love that because you have the whole spring, from spring to the following November to hang out. But this is going to be a squeeze tight year. Why is that important? Remember, I told you we have a speaker from Miami-Dade County, Danny Perez. So if you're trying to get something in the budget and you haven't access to Danny, you better get started right after June 30th, because we're going to go back in what they call committee weeks, probably September. That's just, what, 3 months? So you don't have a lot of time. So you got to put some, when you get back to your organizations, you need to already be talking about what next year looks like based on what the legislature was buying this session. And remember, those things, somebody wants to know the list of agencies, the internet, on your phone, just go to myflorida.com, myflorida.com will give you the governor, the House, the Senate. There are links to connect there. So that's how you can find the agencies. But don't sleep on this part of it. This is the part that people get so riled up and they want to go and have legislative days on the Capitol and da-da-da-da-da. When this is a very easy, inexpensive step that you probably can do virtually. Even if it's just asking questions, that's what they're there for. So then the Legislative Budget Commission, by the way, who met day before yesterday, they look at the long-range outlook based on revenue coming in, revenue going out, the number of people that are coming to the state of Florida, what we're using money on, that kind of thing. And so the Legislative Budget Commission does a long-term goal based on what they see, the trends that they see. There's a little lady called Amy Baker, and who, if she walked through that room right there, butt naked, you would know who she was, because she is the economist for the state. And she's the one that kind of lays out what we think, the kind of money that we think we're going to have. All right. So then once they do the outlook, then the Legislative Budget Commission, watch the little arrows, then starts to look at what that base budget is, just like you do at home. I'm starting to do a budget because I kind of got off track. what's my base budget? Electricity, gas, um, water, my water bill, those basic things that go into a base budget. They start to look at that and then adjust it towards looking for the next session. When they do that, then they give their allocations or kind of directions to the state agencies, where then they make their requests. Because remember, they got to request to the legislature too, stuff that they need. So the Department of Health, all the agencies would ask for their plan, and most of these are requests from the governor, what the governor would like to see, because they work for the governor. Now, hold up a minute. They're fighting. The legislature and the governor kind of like not seeing eye to eye. And what's happening there? Anybody know? Anybody know about what's happening with the agency budgets? Whole Florida? The legislature's cutting it. They're cutting, and they just passed, they included some language that requires accountability measures. So there's some transparency disclosures. And this is in direct response to Hope Florida, where arguably, I'm a lawyer, I use words like arguably, arguably the agency then diverted some money towards the campaign, arguably, the campaign against marijuana. So now there's this whole thought that we need more accountability measures. So if I'm doing a request for next year, you better believe I'm going to be talking about accountability and some checks and balances, so they know we good with our money, right? So the state agencies will go ahead and submit. This will be like August-ish, August, September-ish, because the governor has to recommend a budget. He'll do his budget prior to session or right at session. So he has to be ready in January. And it goes all the way again. The session starts in January and we go all the way. So I would urge you to keep this little chart so you'll know exactly when to attack. Exactly when you want to look at the agencies, when you want to talk to the legislators. And notice, and I bring this chart up all the time, there's a lot of stuff that's happening before you just, everybody thinks about, let me just ask for a request, a member request, let me get somebody to sponsor it, and then you wait around, and then the governor vetoes it, and then we all are looking crazy. So this is a way to get your money up front. And let me tell you what else that's important. As you talk to these agencies, they also have the opportunity to create legislation for things that make their job better. A good example was the Fatherhood Initiative that was put forth working with the Department of Children and Families. And there were beneficiaries right there in Miami-Dade under that initiative, because there was language broad enough to bring in children as well. So you can, as you pay attention to the agencies, when you talk to them, you get inside information that's not published anywhere. So I encourage you to do that. All right, so that's that picture, the budget process. We're at the top, but no, all those other arrows are all a part of the process. It doesn't just happen during the legislative session. And that brings me to I'm going to stop and answer any questions on the budget, because most of you probably have not seen this side of budgeting. And I ordinarily, in a conversation about advocacy, I would not go into much detail. But when you have a supermajority that makes the rules, and he who rules, rules, you have to come up with alternatives, because many of the clients that I have are in areas where the leadership where the legislators are from the minority party. And so I have to help them help their communities, because the needs don't go away. The needs don't go away. And we have to make sure that there's some equity to take care of those people who cannot take care of themselves. Now, there's been some talk that they don't want to talk about financial underserved communities. But let me tell you something. If we don't do it, it's going to cost the state in the long run. So you have to just put it in the language that they understand. Okay, any questions on the budget process? Okay. All right, somebody had a question?
Cecilia Stewart speaking,
Okay.
focusing on the community being prepared as possible. What data does a community need to make legislation or to change a policy?
Listen, I wish I could tell you there was some fancy formula, but it's not. It's called good. It's called sharing what's actually going on into your communities. It depends. If you're telling me, so I represent historically Black colleges. I hope this is a good example. And there is a movement in the budget coming from the House side that would put metrics on schools to determine whether or not their students would be eligible to receive what we used to call it FRAG, but it's now called EASE. And that is the state of Florida gives grants to each and every student that attend, if they're a Florida resident, that attends a Florida-based private institution. In my case, the metrics that the legislature in the House, by the way, Senate didn't say anything about it, which is a whole nother thing. But in my case, my students don't just drop out, they stop out. So their review of that metrics about graduation rate just doesn't make sense. So what did I do? I provided the data on my particular school or my particular schools that showed that if they instituted this metrics the way that they have it, that each and every student that attends a HBCU that's a Florida resident will get nothing. The metrics doesn't work. How did I show that? I showed our graduation rate. I showed those students that stop out. 90% of those students are Pell eligible. When I said that, I mean, what do you mean Pell eligible? That means they come from households of $50,000 or less. How the heck they gonna pay to go to Barry or University of Miami or whatever? And why should the students that decide to go to Ford Memorial or Bethune or Edward Waters be deprived of getting the same benefits that any other Florida residents gets just because their parents are poor? So you see that passion? So that's data. That's data that makes the difference. And so that's what you have to do. That's just an example. And know that you know more about your community than the legislature does. They just got there. They are not experts. They just got there. Ironically, the people who know the most about data and specific issues are you, and you have to share it. And that's a part of advocacy as well.
Thank you, Yolanda. I think I see a question in the chat. It says, how do we prepare?
Good question. How you show up is very important. And you don't have to go to Tallahassee. You can go right locally to their district offices. You can invite them to your events. They may not, the legislator may not come, but they will send their staff, right? So that's, so you prepare by being prepared. You want to tell about the organization. You want to talk about your ask, get your ask down. You want to have a one-pager That is a one-pager back and forth because nobody wants to read a booklet. Do not do a booklet. Oh my God, that drives me crazy. Do not do a booklet. A one-pager indicating your points, your key points, and your ask. So you have a little bit of background, key points, and ask, and then practice. Practice with whomever's going in the room. I suggest that you take a group of no more than maybe 4 or 5, and then if you wanted, like you have a group of students and that kind of thing, and they come up to Tallahassee, that's great. But, just make sure that the legislator and their officers are prepared for the size crowd. And then I would say, you prepare by practicing because you need to get to the point. Get to the point. They don't need to know, if you're advocating Mary had a little lamb, they don't need to know the ancestry of the lamb. You know what I mean? Like you want to get right to what you're succinct, give them a leave behind, and I like to put it on color paper because they say, you know what? Yolanda came to see me, and I think it's on that red paper. Isn't that crazy? And then in preparing, I always try to give them a heads up on what I'm going to be talking about. And sometimes that's in my confirmation emails. This is confirmed. We're going to meet on June 5th at 10 o'clock. We will be talking about A, B, and C. And then I do closing, after it's done, I thank them for doing it. And then guess what? I also encourage my clients to talk to their legislative staff and, hey, can you guys put us on the mailing list? Because you got to go and support them too. It's called Operation Fill the Room. When they have these town hall meetings, bring your folks, invite your folks, invite your board to sit there. It gives you one-on-one time, and they never forget that you were there. And guess what? It doesn't cost a dime to do that. So those are little kind of secrets in getting prepared. I have seen it work. If you're willing to put in the time to know what you need to be selling and to find out what they're buying, I guarantee you success. I guarantee it works all the time.
Thank you so much, Yolanda. Last question that I see on the chat. Can we find the list of agencies with funds available on the state website?
Okay. I didn't really. Yes. You can do that. Each website has grant information, all the way from the Secretary of State to Department of Commerce has a lot of money. A lot of money. They have job growth grants. Oh, let me say this. And you talk about agencies. Look for partners. Don't be afraid to partner. That's very, very important. And let me just wrap up because I know the time is getting long. But what's next? Very important. What's next? You're talking about being prepared. You need to be prepared for the what's next. Once Danny Perez is out as speaker, it is probable that we won't have another speaker from Miami-Dade County for at least 6 to 8 years. Street Committee says that one of the younger legislators, Mike Redondo, who came in on a special election, has supposed to be speaker. I don't know if I was supposed to say that because you're recording it, but if you tell it, I know who told it because it would be somebody in this room. But anyway, so it's going to be a long time before we have leadership in the House from Miami-Dade County. And then on the Senate side, I just don't see it in any for future based on the legislators that are there now. We have very capable, sharp legislators, but right now they're not in line to be Senate president. So that presents an opportunity and a challenge. So you may have to look at future leadership and connect in other ways. The next Speaker of the House is Sam Garrison from Clay County. The next Senate President is Boyd I think he's from Bradenton. After him on the Senate side, I believe it's going to be Trumbull. And after him, the street committee says Senator Leak has the votes. So that, if you add that together, that's 6 years. So whoever, if we have a Senate president from Dade County, it'll be at least 8 years. And you got to look at who's going to be there a long time. Some of the House members are going to have really visible leadership roles. I mentioned Emmy Basada, she's chair of higher education. So getting prepared for what's next is important. Then the last thing for what's next is that your individual preparation is necessary. You cannot be an advocate and not know who represents you. And that always, if there's one thing that's so disappointing to me, is that we spend time talking about advocacy, but we don't talk to the people where we live, who we voted for. So I want to close with this charge and quote unquote call to action. And I am a registered lobbyist. So anyway, that call to action is this: take the time to know your legislator. Know what committees that they sit on. The committees may change, but generally they don't. Know what their passions are. Please, please, please get on their mailing list. I'm gonna say that again. Please, please, please get on their mailing list. Please, please, please make sure they're on your mailing list. And that does not cost you a dime. So that's all I have. If you have any more questions, I'm happy to answer them. I know that was a lot, but I wanted you to see what the process is. The only way that you can make a change and advocate for change is to be present. So that's all I have.
John Bitterman, 1 second.
Sorry.
Board member, so be really respectful and deferent.
Hello, Yolanda. Good to see you again.
Good to see you.
It's more of a validation than a question because you did an excellent job today. Alan did and Maria. But I want to share a little story that recently I got from another nonprofit here in the community. It's been here 40 years. And everything you said about taking up space, being tenacious, determined, focused, strategic, don't give up. Because this organization was in, I don't want to mention their name.
You can if you want.
Well, I probably shouldn't.
Okay.
But they've been in the community for 40 years. They're in the LGBTQ not-for-profit. And they had a grant that was pulled immediately. And their funding was dependent on it for medical services, testing, and healthcare. And in the long run, they worked around it and worked with the system. They had redacted the grant, so they got the money back. And they just had to use workaround words, and they got the funding. But to me, the most surprising thing was, and not just because I'm here with the Women's Fund today, but they got rejected on the last time because they put a capital W on woman. And it was that simple. And that wasn't their wheelhouse necessarily, but they just had to not have to capitalize, and they got the money. So, and last but not least, work with partners in the community, because that's a workaround too, to make it more broad.
Thank you so much for that. Amen, amen. Amen, amen. Thank you for that.
Yolanda, my question, but comment feeds off of what John is saying. What do you think about strength in numbers? For example, many of us we feel like, oh, we're not that important, so me voicing what I want isn't that important. What do you think about coming and saying, actually, your voice is important, because you can say that you're a volunteer with, or you're a follower of the Women's Fund Miami-Dade, and you know that they have so many followers and 8,000 people read our e-blast. What do you think about utilizing numbers when you're talking to policymakers?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you want to demonstrate impact. And if you demonstrate impact in numbers, then that's important. Listen, but also you can share their information on your network. I do it all the time. I do right during the pandemic, well, when we were really focused on women at the time, we started a phone call on Monday night. And I tell you what, that phone call turned into a network of one night. We had 2,000 women on from Florida. 2,000. And you think I haven't used that? And I've invited legislators to that network to speak to my network. And sometimes I get a call. Hey, girl, can I get on the Monday night call to talk about my X, Y, and Z? So if you have numbers, consider things like webinars where you're bringing your membership and allowing the legislator to address 800 people. Remember, all politics is local, and House members run every 2 years. And I can tell you that there are a group of people that are betting on the fact that during midterm elections, that's 26, that there will be some changes based on the policies that go on. They will want to talk to people who are their friends. And guess what? That doesn't cost you a dime. And if you're not going to call to action, as our former speaker told us, you are not lobbying, you're providing information. So I love it.
Terrific, terrific. There is another question on the chat that you may see there. What
Mhm.
advice do you give for Black American-led orgs and issues that are Black specific being ignored by legislators, Black Congressional Caucus, etc.?
All right. So I take issue with the ignored. It's I just take issue with it. I think it goes back to buying what, selling what they're buying. We get, for example, let me give another example. I represent, like I said, HBCUs. And at the time, maybe 2 years ago, there started this question of security breaches at Jewish day schools and religious institutions. My historically Black colleges, private ones, are all connected to religious institutions. Now, what do you think my lead was to why we should get some of the money, the same money that the Jewish day schools were getting? It's because they're a religious institution. I never said Black, not one time. Because they're connected to religious institutions. And I added another thing that they had what they call risk assessments done by Homeland Security. And guess what? We got $5 million each, signed by this governor who doesn't like DEI. So I take issue with the ignoring. I think you just have to engage, because you can't just drop out. You just can't. So I'll give you another example, and I hate using names, but to make it really clear. One of my passions is I'm my family historian. And one of the things that I've been working on is locating my relatives, only to find out that they're in a cemetery in Brownsville. Lincoln, there's two, Lincoln and Evergreen, they're in Lincoln. And they've had some challenges in the upkeep and all of that, people breaking in. But you know who represents Brownsville? It's my state senator. His district goes all the way down to Brownsville. And guess what? We're going to visit the cemetery, right? Did I say Black?
Yeah.
Okay. Last example, because I want to bring this home. We can't not participate because the language seems to appear that Black people can't. We just got to get around it. We just got to figure out a way to get it. Last example, about 8 years ago, there was a huge case that was brought forth against the USDA about Black farmers. And the name of that case was Pickford. Well, the state decided that it was going to do medical marijuana. We wanted to ensure that Black farmers, those same Black farmers, were able to benefit from the legislation. Well, we couldn't say Black farmers, so we called them Pickford litigants. Pickford litigants. And who were those Black farmers who were successful? And guess what? Last year, it took us a long time because there were a bunch of lawsuits. I think now we're up to 5 licenses of Black farmers. How about that? Pickford litigants, not Black farmers. So you can do it, you can do it, but we cannot allow the conversation to be that we are eliminating Black folks, or Black folks are not going to be a part of this because we pay taxes and all of that. And why I'm saying Black is an issue, because we got this DEI thing going on that really nobody don't really know what it means, in my opinion, but it's a thing. So let's get around the thing. And the one thing that I've learned about this as a lobbyist, I don't take stuff personally and I don't get emotional. No permanent enemies, no permanent friends. I have said harsh words to some folks in Tallahassee when I'm on one issue, but then we have to work together on another. So you can't get too wound up in at least for what I do. I love everybody, Republican, Democrat, and in between. And guess what? As long as they love me, we're good. So that's kind of how I look at it. But I can do that because that's my profession. I just can't get all worked up on it because my clients pay me for results, not to be emotional. Now, I may be emotional.
Since you talked about love, I think everybody would agree that, and we love you, Yolanda. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Incredibly.
This is always so much fun. Thank you so much for inviting me.
So we are not alone. And we are forever changed from today. My brain is bigger, my self-confidence is bigger, my heart's a little bit bigger, my eyes are a little bit sharper. And I dare say that each and every one of us who's attended in any way is the same today. So how do we keep that momentum going, right? Yolanda gave us some really good tips. Make sure that you understand how to articulate what you're selling in the language of what they're buying, and then she guaranteed us success. So everybody's busy, but we do have some momentum going here. So take the thing that you care most about, and if you don't know how to contact your legislator, or if you don't know what they care about, it very well may be that some of the brilliant interns that are working with Viviana, for example, raise your hand right here, might be able to either have that research for you about the things that your representatives care about, or very willing to help. Yolanda talked about Vicki Lopez and the things that she cares about. It's not that hard to figure it out. So just know that you're not alone. It doesn't have to take that much time, but we are here and we're at your service. So we also know that this is recorded, and so you can take these bits and pieces. That's the other call to action that I would have that's not lobbying. That's go back and read it when you're walking your dog, or listen to it like a podcast when you're walking your dog. Fast forward when you're on the treadmill, when you're chopping vegetables. There's going to be something that gets really clicked when you listen to certain things the second time, that 1 or 2 or 3 things that you know, and then it's going to make you think of somebody else you know who would really care. It might be your pastor. It might be somebody in your PTA. It might be somebody in your student organization. It might be for a paper you're writing or for a presentation that you're doing. Please use this share it, and then we can keep it alive all the way till next year. So some of you have to drop off, we know. We're gonna continue to record. We have done some very specific action-oriented focuses at the end of each advocacy training in the most recent ones we're doing. Many of you know that the Women's Fund started convening people years ago, and we started hearing from some of our experts that climate change was affecting local economic mobility for many of the residents who had to decide if they were going to have money for diapers or food or gas or air conditioning, and that was affecting their health. One thing led to another and another and another, and your Women's Fund has been very involved in the effects of extreme heat on birth outcomes, right? So that affects us all. It's health, it's local economy, whatever makes you pay attention. It's not good for us if we're not letting the community know that we need to support people vis-a-vis climate change, and especially those people who are experiencing it. We have amazing partnerships and incredible leaders who I learned from day in and day out, and one of them is Esteban Wood with We Count, and I'm gonna turn it over to Esteban to give us some hyper focus on what we can do on this issue. Esteban, welcome and thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Maria. It's an honor to be here with y'all today. Yeah, should we get started?
Yes, please.
Awesome. Well, my name is Esteban Wood. I am the policy director of We Count. We are a membership-based organization based in Homestead, Florida. Our members are farm workers or plant nursery workers. They're domestic workers and construction workers. And for the last 5 years, we've been fighting climate justice campaigns for basic heat protections for outdoor workers. And that includes water, shade, rest breaks for workers who are most vulnerable to extreme heat conditions. So I'm going to share my screen here now. Let's see here. Awesome. So primarily we're a worker center. You know, we organize outdoor workers. Like I said, we're fighting for better living and working conditions across South Florida. And some of the campaigns that I'm going to be mentioning today revolve around heat. Some of them are going to revolve around domestic worker issues, housekeepers, nannies, babysitters, who we organize as well. But this training here that we're convened around is around advocacy, right? And so what I'm going to be speaking about is basically 5 steps on how you can perform advocacy in a more efficacious way. You know, we're going to be covering identifying your issue, right? Being the most important, right? Building out your community, identifying who are most affected and who are secondarily affected, and getting them bought into your campaign and your advocacy work. Forming coalitions, the importance of partnering with other groups who share similar goals to amplify your impact and your reach. Setting clear goals and identifying who are the decision makers who can actually get you to where you want to go, and then taking action, right? So those 5 things I'm going to be covering today, but maybe first we can get started. Let me optimize my sound here 1 second so that we can see this very short video on our Que Calor campaign. All right, so we'll watch this now.
Yo trabajo en el campo, en la agricultura. Nos levantamos a las 4 a.m. todos los días. antes de las 7 o a las 7 ya estoy en mi trabajo. Pero el transcurso de cómo va aumentando la calor, el cuerpo va resintiendo. Como uno anda agachado y todo eso pega el rayo del sol en la espalda. Aunque yo cargo siempre mi agua en mi carro para ayudar al riñón. Pero llegó el momento que ya no resistieron. A veces me meto debajo de la camioneta porque sombra sí no hay.
¿Está buscando a alguien?
Sí, necesito pintar mi casa.
¿Pintar mi casa?
Sí.
¿Cuánto paga
Como
por hora?
11, no sé.
En una ocasión estaba yo en una escalera pintando y hacía un calor bastante intenso. Perdí el control y caí de la escalera de un segundo piso y eso me pasó a raíz de la intensidad del calor.
Mire, en el campo, todas las verduras, ¿quién lo hace eso? ¿Quién lo trabaja eso? Somos nosotros los inmigrantes, ¿verdad? Si no hay personas que trabajan, pues no hay comida para las demás personas. Y ahí no puedes buscar una sombra, ¿verdad? En las nurserías no lo dan protección a los trabajadores. Ahí sí uno tiene que ir preparado, ¿verdad? Con su camisa de manga larga, con su sombrero. La propuesta ahora es lograr una ley para dar una protección hacia los trabajadores del campo.
Agua, sombra y descanso. Eso es lo que estamos pidiéndole.
Si el gobierno lo aprueba esa ley, va a todos los emigrantes, a todos los trabajadores. Si no vamos a organizar, si no nos vamos a levantar, a exigir, y entonces, ¿quién lo va a hacer?
¡Qué calor!
Hay veces quedamos sin agua y nosotros queremos el agua porque ahora hay mucho calor.
All right. Well, hopefully y'all enjoyed that short video. It features several of our members, farm workers and nursery workers who labor in brutal heat without the protections they deserve. And they all live here in Miami-Dade, and they've been fighting for basic heat protections for several years now. And I wanted to show that video because it features some of the things that I'm going to be speaking about here today, right? The importance of setting clear goals. As you saw Jose Delgado mention, he said that we wanted a new law, right? We shared research, we shared data that reflects the importance and the damaging impacts that heat has on the human body. We called for change. We set clear goals, right? We weren't vague. We were very specific on achievable, measurable objectives, right? And so part of this work of base building requires you to reach people where they're at, whether that means their work sites, in their homes, in their neighborhoods, and creating specific leadership opportunities for directly impacted workers to actually have a decision-making role in the strategy of the campaign, right? And so here we'll see a member, Alejandro, speak directly to his coworkers about the need for heat protections and how it impacts him. So we'll see this.
Sí, compañeros, muy buenos días. Pues Dios ya me ha permitido, ¿verdad?, de dar otro día más de trabajo. Pues aquí estoy con los compañeros, aquí ayudando, ¿verdad?, a rejuntar basura. Aquí, como ven, aquí están los camiones de basura, todo eso, pero sabemos de que es muy duro nuestra rutina, madrugar y todo esto, ¿verdad? Y también está muy duro el calorcito, qué calor, mi hermano, de veras, pero estamos, ¿verdad?, exigiendo, ¿verdad?, en el trabajo que nos den agua, sombra y descanso. Y ojalá que pasemos esta ley para que así nuestra gente no se muere por calor, porque siempre es muy duro el exceso de calor. Así pues, compañero, aquí estamos trabajando fuertemente, como lo ven, no es nada fácil, pero bueno, siempre estamos aquí luchando para el sostenimiento de nuestra familia en Guatemala. Así es, compañero, donde quiera que estemos trabajando, pues exijamos agua, sombra y descanso, y eso pues es nuestro derecho cada uno de nosotros como humanos. Muchas gracias, buen día.
So as you saw Alejandro say, he was very, very specific about what our demand is. I think it was MLK who said, power sees nothing without a demand, right? And we have to be very specific about what we're asking for, especially when we're dealing with politicians who, like to pretend as if they don't hear, or they can't act on community demands. I think that's the point that I was trying to emphasize with those two slides, is we can't be vague, we can't be overly broad, we have to be very, very specific, narrowly specific about what we're asking for, and then build from there, right? Advocacy, for the purposes of this training here today, is a tool, right? It's a tool, much like storytelling is a tool, much like coalition building is a tool, right? But at the end of the day, advocacy is a tool to achieve what we want through campaigns. So the Que Calor campaign, like I mentioned before, did enormous work reaching communities who are directly impacted. We held workshops, we went on plant nurseries and farms across South Florida to reach more workers, to get the word out and to get their buy-in about what we were trying to achieve. Those three simple things: a very digestible demand, water, shade, rest, agua, sombra y descanso, right? We even did really, really comprehensive work on broadcasting through our radio station. We operate an FM radio station in the South Dade region, 97.7 FM, Radio Poder, La Chispa del Pueblo, right? Where we broadcast heat safety information in multiple languages, not only Spanish, but also native Mayan languages like many of our members speak, right? Mam, Ixil, Canchubal, Quiche, right? Some of the most difficult to organize and reach workers because they speak those native indigenous languages, right? And many of them don't understand the impacts that heat has on the human body because of those language barriers, right? And so after years of on the ground organizing, we got to the place where we're able to form hundreds, a base of hundreds of outdoor workers and allies to support this cause, right? Agua, sombra y descanso. We got to the point where we got the support of the county mayor, Danielle Levine Cava, to get behind this broad effort. First, we went to Tallahassee, right? We advocated with their state legislators to pass a statewide education and training heat safety bill. We got that introduced in 2018, 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023, right? 8 years of introducing legislation that went nowhere, right? We did not get anywhere because Tallahassee is broken, right? And it was a bill that simply required education and training. Because of that, because we were able to follow the leadership of these outdoor workers who had the urgency to act, right? They decided, the workers themselves decided to pivot, right? To pivot to a local strategy where we were to pursue a local ordinance in Miami-Dade County, the largest county in the state of Florida, and the county that has the most amount of outdoor workers, right? 300,000 outdoor workers, to offer some sort of legislative fix at the local level, right? We have to understand and contextualize this and remember that outdoor workers are up to 35 times more likely to die from extreme heat exposure, right? We know that thousands of outdoor workers die on the job every single year in the United States, and there's more than 170,000 occupational injuries as it relates to extreme heat. Extreme heat, as many of you know, this is not a extreme heat lecture, it's an advocacy lecture, but as many of you know, it causes heat syncope, heat stroke, rhabdomyolysis, muscle cramps, migraines, all that contribute to these on-the-job injuries and deaths, especially those, like Maria mentioned before, with pre-existing conditions, pregnant workers, for example, those with kidney injuries, those who are on specific medications. The heat can contribute more severely to those individuals, right? Older adults, children, of course, are all impacted. Outdoor workers are definitely most, right? Because they spend 8 to 10 hours in triple digit temperatures every single day, sometimes without opportunities, like you saw in the video, to take a short 10-minute rest break every couple of hours of work. And some don't have access, like in plant nurseries, to clean, safe, cold drinking water on the job. And so with this campaign, right, because we decided to pivot to a local strategy in Miami-Dade to pursue a local county ordinance, with that advocacy and with that campaign brought a lot of media attention, right? National, international media attention on both this issue and our local campaign for basic heat protections and the right to really live and survive on the job. What to do with all that attention is really what I want to focus on today, sort of channeling that into some sort of action to mobilize, energize, and inspire partners in the movement, right? To build out our coalition so that it's not just we count on the front lines, but also bringing in medical experts, right? Public health doctors, right? Climate justice experts, climate scientists, right? Meteorologists, for example, all who understand this issue, understand the importance of doing something about it, and getting them to stand alongside and show active solidarity with the outdoor workers who are asking for the most basic of things, right? Just water and shade on the job. And so with that inspired action, with that inspired momentum and movement on this issue, right? We introduced the legislation, the first of its kind, the first county heat standard introduced in the United States here in Miami-Dade County. And we were able to galvanize support from hundreds of people, not only outdoor workers, but people in the faith community, people at our public institutions like Jackson Memorial Hospital. The head nurse of Jackson Memorial Hospital spoke out in favor of this legislation, this basic legislation. The head emergency room doctor at Jackson Memorial Hospital spoke out to the unprecedented number of heat hospitalizations seen that summer in 2023. Dade County Street Response, Dr. Cheryl Holder, the medical community, all came to the support of outdoor workers who are uplifting this demand. Outdoor workers themselves took leadership roles in the campaign, deciding everything as simple as what do we do next? Who do we invite here? What should be the next escalation point to get more eyeballs on the campaign? This is outdoor workers, both construction and farm workers, who decided to undergo a water strike where they decided to temporarily fast from drinking water on an extremely hot triple-digit day to get more media attention on this issue and for people to actually take this take this demand seriously. This was a life and death issue for them, and they wanted more people to pay attention to it. This is the head doctor of Jackson Memorial Hospital, and nurses who showed active solidarity with the Qué Color campaign. Outdoor workers themselves. Sandra, a plant nursery worker, was at the center of this demand and this ask, right? Centering the voices of those directly impacted is especially important when we're talking about advocacy campaigns. And with that brought a comprehensive and a vast coalition, right? We had climate science organizations there. We had labor unions at the table who were showing active solidarity with this campaign. Nonprofit groups, legal organizations, social service organizations all came to the aid of these outdoor workers asking for the bare minimum. And we got to the point where the legislation was introduced and it passed unanimously on first reading. Very shortly after, though, we experienced the first sort of reaction from industry organizations who were very opposed to this effort. And with that opposition came sort of lobbying, as we heard earlier today, came public pressure on elected officials to reconsider this demand for basic protections. And unfortunately, just 7 days after this legislation was first considered on first reading, we had Chamber of Commerce come in and work with Tallahassee legislators to introduce preemption legislation, essentially banning any city or county from introducing legislation on this topic, right? On protecting outdoor workers. And so a couple of months later, that's exactly what happened. Florida baffles experts by banning water break rules as deadly heat is on the rise, is a USA Today headline. Governor DeSantis signed this legislation into law in early 2024 and essentially handcuffed local cities and counties' ability to take any sort of action, right? This is especially painful for outdoor workers because it's so broad in its impact and its scope, right? Today, as we stand here, no county or city can even require businesses from putting up a sign that says, remember to drink water, right? If you obligate a business from doing anything, even education, right? That is against the law in the free state of Florida, I say in quotes, right? And it's not something new, right? We know that Governor Greg Abbott in Texas signed a similar bill into law a couple of years back. And so we're seeing this popularization of extremely anti-democratic and anti-worker legislation proliferate across the southern United States. And it's a worrying trend. And it's something that we need to look at a national level. And that's a great segue, right? Because what happens in these advocacy campaigns where you end up with an unexpected setback, right? What do you do? How do you not, how do you make sure that your base of supporters and your coalition allies don't get demoralized by setbacks, right? You continue moving on, you continue pushing through, right? It's this idea of praxis, right? Of learning through failure, right? Failing forwards, for example, experimenting with different strategies and sometimes losing, experimenting with different strategies and sometimes winning, right? And reorienting and reassessing so that you can make the next step forward in your strategy, right? And it's a great segue to what we did and how the Qué Calor campaign and the workers responded to this unexpected setback that was extremely profoundly saddening, right? To these workers, right? To these families who were asking for the bare minimum and for years now, we're asking for just a little bit of recognition to validate the experiences and the dangers that they were experiencing on the job, right? And so after this preemption legislation, terrible, cruel legislation that Florida passed in 2024, our focus then was reoriented to a national standard, right? One of the cool things, most beautiful things that we got to see was on the one day after the preemption legislation took effect on July 1st of 2024, the Biden administration and OSHA decided to publish its national proposed heat standard, right? This was advocating for this proposed national heat standard would have protected 35 million outdoor workers in the United States. It would have guaranteed many of the same protections that we were seeking at the local level, right? Water breaks, access to rest every couple of hours, right? For 10 minutes. Shade, for example, access to heat education training and safety, right? A buddy system protocol so that workers who work by themselves wouldn't be completely isolated and alone in the worst case scenario were to happen, which is if they were to collapse on the job, somebody would be there to make sure that they were protected and can get access to first aid. And so that's where we reoriented our efforts and our focus. This picture shows Acting Secretary of Labor Julie Su, who came to our Homestead office, who listened to workers who were leading the campaign and making decisions about what the next steps would be. She encouraged us and actually credited the We Count campaign for fast tracking the rule by the Biden administration in recognition of the dangers of states passing these heat preemption bills across the country. They wanted to be proactive in their response. This on the bottom right is a roundtable that We Count participated in, and our members took leadership roles in with the mayor, Danielle Levine Cava, with Frederica Wilson, our congresswoman here in Miami-Dade, and also then Secretary of Labor, Marty Walsh, right? Getting them on board on our side in recognition of outdoor workers and the dangers that heat faces.
Thank you so much. If you want, we do need to, do you want to finish your thought, your most important thought? Because we are shockingly approaching we're at time.
Okay, no worries. I have 23 minutes on my clock, but no worries. So yeah, essentially, I kind of emphasized already the main points, right? The importance of forming coalitions with other groups, right? The importance of setting clear goals, right? The importance of making sure that directly impacted folks have a seat at the table and are involved in key decision-making and negotiations for campaigns, right? Getting people all coalesced around a single action item and demand, right? Getting experts at the table. And yeah, I was going to discuss a little bit more, but here's my information. Here's my email address. If anyone has any questions or wants to get involved with the campaign, please let me know. And I guess my last message would be, if I'll stop sharing my screen here and I'll just share my last sort of thought. I mean, a lot of people are feeling really overwhelmed, right, by where we are, especially at the federal level, right? And I'd leave you with this. If you're feeling overwhelmed, I'd invite you to find an organization that speaks to your values, right? Speaks to your vision for the future, and get involved with organizations, right? Organizations provide not only the hope that we need in this moment, but a little bit of the momentum to actually get us to those places. And so I invite you to get involved with community-based organizations and do something, right? Don't be paralyzed by this moment, right? Because a lot of people are feeling paralyzed and overwhelmed.
We are hyper connected. You must continue to follow We Count's work. We are here to be working together to do that. We will be collaborating many times with We Count. We're working on several different things together, and there's some events coming up. So Natasha from our team and Vivian and everybody will make sure that if you're following us on our social media, if you're getting our e-blast, if you're looking on the website, looking at the LinkedIn, you're gonna find ways that you can work with Esteban, with Recount, and with us. And there's no question, hashtag stronger together. And we hope that's what we leave you with today. So grateful for everybody being here. I know we're over time, but we're gonna ask Esteban if he could stay a few more minutes, just in case there are any questions. We understand that some people have to drop and have to go. But since we did, I don't know, started a few minutes late, if there are a couple questions, Esteban, can you stay for a few more minutes?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, great. So you tap me if there's anybody on screen, and anybody, I'll look here live in the audience. Any questions? Here we go.
Hi, my name is Sandy, and thank you so much for sharing your story. It's super powerful just how the passion grew into a really large momentum. My question is that I'm a graduate student, and I feel like it's hard to take the voice of like from a student's perspective and then find that community to go for your dreams, you know, or go and speak for the community you want to serve. So do you have any piece of advice for the youth that are like just getting started in their careers or just getting you know, equipped? Like how do you connect with others and then start to make that momentum grow to, you know, advance your like vision and to support people that you know need to share their stories and need that empowerment?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the way that I would give advice to the youth would be to get involved. That's the easiest way to sort of start by helping people who are directly impacted by social justice issues, by exploitation issues, is show up to events in person. I think one of the things that we've seen from the beginning of the 1970s is this sort of brand new neoliberal idea of redefining what it is to have personal success, right? And I think because of those things, we've gotten completely lost as a society about what it means to actually be personally successful. And so I think the younger generations need to sort of get back to the principles of showing solidarity with different communities. And sometimes showing active solidarity means showing up, volunteering, going to events in person. I think what I mentioned before about finding an organization is really resonant, right? In organization, we find community, and in community, we find hope. And so I think that's what I would share with the youth is the importance of showing up, the importance of lending a hand, volunteering, you know, offering labor to these organizations. If you speak different languages, for example, there's so many different organizations here in Miami that require translation, interpretation support when we work with these communities, whether that be in Haitian Creole, whether that be in Spanish, whether that be in other languages. If you are able and you have those unique capabilities and skills, you can actually use them to in service of active campaigns and to show that support. And so that's what I would offer. And also read, right? One of the things that I think young people especially are not doing enough of, and I include myself in young people, is reading, learning, finding sort of theory, right? And getting a better grasp of those things so that you could actually, so you're more prepared to handle more complex challenges down the road.
In closing, Esteban, can you talk about the event that you've got and that you're putting together for in front of the county hall? Can you talk about a new opportunity to get together?
Yeah, that's a great, thank you, Maria. We're hosting a rally and a press conference in celebration of International Domestic Workers Day on Monday, June 16th at 3:30, right at Government Center in downtown Miami. It's going to be a beautiful celebration. It's going to be a hopeful gathering of allies and domestic workers who are nannies, who are housekeepers, who are babysitters, who are home healthcare aides, who take care of the elderly and the sick, in support, again, going back to demands of respect and dignity on the job. And so hopefully it'll be a celebration and one that will honor the international holiday. And it will be an opportunity for people to come out and volunteer. And so if you're interested or want to get involved, I can send me an email, or I can put the RSVP link in the chat right now, actually. And we'll see you there.
Thank you so much, every single person who participated today. Whether you're listening or you were speaking, you're amazing. Your voices are important. They are strong, and all of our voices are stronger together. So go forth and take up space. Thank you. Thank you, Siva. Everybody, make sure you drink water today. Take water with you, take some mandarins with you, a banana in each pocket, mandarin in one. And if anybody needs any more information, we're here, but thank you all so much for sharing this with us.